Hey guys, welcome to part 2 of What If Naruto Became a Psycho Killer. If you enjoy the video then like, share and subscribe and also comment your thoughts as it inspires me to make more such videos, and remember to check out my playlist section for other interesting stories. So let's get started. Chapter 3. Insanity Loves Company. It had been a month since Team 8 had gotten their weapons, and ever since then they had been exceptionally close. Shino, Hinata and Kurenai were now more at ease with Naruto, and his odd behavior became very normal to them. It took them a while to realize that Naruto wasn't evil per se, he was just random and took enjoyment out of life where he could. Hinata and Shino had finished water walking in record time, wanting to start training with their new weapons as well as taijutsu and ninjutsu to a limited extent. Kurenai would have Shino and Hinata spare each other while Naruto went against herself. Kurenai discovered quickly when she first matched Naruto against Shino that her other students couldn't keep up with Naruto in a straight fight. He could move faster than most Chunin and he hit as hard as Jonin. Thus Naruto spared with Kurenai as she was able to put Naruto under enough pressure that he actually had to try. Not to say Naruto ever seemed tried, because no matter what she had Naruto do, he was never winded. He had stamina and energy in spades. Kurenai was also helping her students develop their weapon styles. While she wasn't well versed in weapons, she was able to direct them to people that could help. Kurenai herself was starting to get the hang of her weapon, as Naruto had decided to call it the straight shooter. She still had some work to do before she would be able to use the weapon effectively, but she was getting better at handling the recoil and was starting to be able to fire the bullets using her chakra. She also had to practice quite a bit to learn how to accurately shoot the thing. Naruto didn't name the other weapon, saying that Shino and Hinata could do it themselves with their families. Speaking of which, both the Hyuga and Aburame clans had been very impressed with the weapons, so much so that they had requested for more to make so others in the clan could use them. Shino and Hinata had come to Naruto and asked him to make more, but Naruto told them that they could get the weapons from a small ninja shop owned by a man named Higashi. It turned out this was the man Naruto had made the deal for the use of his forge in exchange for Naruto's designs. Naruto had given him the designs after he made them in case this happened, as long as he got a nice 10% cut of the profits and that he tell nobody who made them. Higashi could remake and sell them to the two clans. This even applied to the other clans as well. When Kurenai asked why he didn't want anyone to know he made them, she could have sworn he was channeling his inner Nara when he said, "Too bloody troublesome." It turns out this was more than sufficient, as the Aburame and Hyuga clans were paying a small fortunes for each weapon that they wanted. After all, seal's work is expensive due to the limited number of seal masters and the tedious work required to carve them into the metal. The Hyuga had named Hinata's weapon the Hands of Kami, as they believed their eyes were a gift from Kami herself. The Aburame had been a bit more modest and named their weapon Wasp Point. Higashi and his daughter Tenten were making so much money from Naruto's weapons they were thinking of expanding the shop. Naruto, after many times of being shot off the trees like a cannon, had finally got the hang of tree walking. He even managed to learn water walking. He was by far the most advanced in taijutsu, followed by Hinata. Kurenai also let all of them train on their own from time to time, and Naruto was seen practicing with his katana. XXX. Eventually Team 8 started doing missions again. Kurenai couldn't put off giving them field experience and experience for dealing with clients. Thankfully Naruto had not done anything to the clients. Seems the word had gotten out about what Naruto does to people that cross him, and no one dared to do anything to raise the boy's ire, or they never did it to his face or while he was working for them. Team 8 were currently stood in the Hokage office, after just returning Tora to the daimyo's wife for the 5th time. The Hokage was looking at their mission record to decide if they were ready for a C rank mission. "Well, everything seems to be in order. I see no reason not to give you one." Before he could finish, the doors to the office slammed open and Kiba stormed in, followed by the rest of Team 7 walked in. "Hey, Hokage-sama, can we please get a C rank mission now? These D ranks are driving me and Akamaru crazy." After an apology from Kakashi for Kiba's rudeness, Team 7 noticed Team 8 stood in the room staring at them. Kakashi's eye lingered on Naruto for a moment before moving to Kurenai. "Sorry Kurenai-chan, hope we didn't disturb you." Before Kurenai could answer, she was drowned out by Naruto. Duck ass, dog piss, Pinky, and Inu-san, how you been? Everyone in the room sweat dropped at this, with exception to the three genin, who were silently steaming at the names. Kakashi was shocked a little as Naruto had just called him by his Anbu codename. How much does he remember and how much does he know? Thought a suspicious Kakashi. When they had calmed down, the Hokage spoke. Well, Team 7 does have the necessary number of D ranks to take a C. So how about this? I was just about to give Team 8 here a C rank. What would you say to a joint mission? The two senseis looked at each other for a moment before nodding. Very well. Seeing as Team 8 were here first, Kurenai will be team leader. The mission is to protect a bridge builder named Tazuna while he travels to Wave Country and until he finishes his bridge. The client will be here shortly. No sooner had he said this, an old man walked into the room on unsteady feet. He had a beard, glasses, and smelt like sake. He looked at the genin and scowled. I pay good money for a ninja guard and you give me this. And what the hell is the mummy grinning at? At these words, 4 loud smacks were heard. Looking around the room, Team 7 saw the Hokage, Kurenai, Shino, and Hinata with their hands on their faces and Naruto's grin taking on a sinister edge. The gears in his mind working as thousands of possible plans formulated in his twisted mind. Team 7 was confused, but Kakashi pressed on, not seeing any real option at the moment. Well, let's meet up tomorrow morning at the front gate where we can check out your gear before heading out to Wave Country. I would recommend packing a long-term mission as this mission could last more than a month. Everyone nodded before they headed out to prepare for the mission. XXX. Both Team 8 and 7 were stood at the front gates of Konoha, waiting for Tazuna to show up so they could leave. Both Kurenai and Kakashi had checked their team's equipment and had cleared them to go on the mission. After what Tazuna had said the day before, the Hokage had quickly dismissed them and told them when to be here to go. The two teams were keeping their distance from each other, mostly because of Naruto. Speaking of Naruto, both Kurenai and Kakashi were worried what he would do, his track record speaking for itself. They knew he wouldn't actually kill Tazuna since he promised the Hokage he wouldn't, but beyond that they didn't know. Naruto came up with the most unorthodox ways of getting people that anything he did could be a way to prank you. They didn't have to wait long. Right on time they could see Tazuna heading their way. He had the same clothes and smell as the day before, but he was able to walk in a straight line. His eyes were red and he was clearly suffering from a monster hangover. As he approached, Kurenai cast a nervous eye over to Naruto. He was just stood there, grinning at Tazuna. Not breaking his stride, the old man walked right past them and through the gate. Nodding to their teams, Kurenai and Kakashi followed after him. They were about an hour away from the village when Naruto started to walk next to the old drunk. They spoke in low voices for a moment when Naruto pulled out a small silver flask. Handing it to Tazuna, he took the lid off and had taken a swig before anyone could stop him. Giving the flask back to the boy, he stood there a moment, all eyes on him. Then his eyes went wide. He opened his mouth and they could all see smoke coming out. It was shortly after this that all the strength left his legs and he fell over. Bending down and lifting the old man onto his shoulder, laughing the whole time, Naruto started to continue heading towards Wave. Walking up to her student, Kurenai asks, "What the hell was in that flask, Naruto?" This caused Naruto to laugh louder, before answering, "Don't worry. He'll wake up in 10 minutes. I gave him my homemade hangover cure." Ha ha. Did you see the smoke? All the ninja present just sweat dropped at the insane boy's antics. Naruto, if this is to get rid of his hangover, then why in the name of Kami is he unconscious? What the hell is in that stuff? Turning around and walking backwards so he was facing them, Naruto got a thoughtful look on his face. Well, let me think. A few herbs, some spices, wasabi, chili powder, oh, and some strange fish I found in the lake at the training grounds. They all sweat dropped again at Naruto's description of his cure. Luckily for them, they were getting used to Naruto, well as used to him as one could get anyway. They were actually surprised when, exactly 10 minutes later, Tazuna's eyes shot open and he started to run around holding his throat. After being given water, he turned to Kurenai and said in a dry voice, "What the hell? What did the mummy give me to fucking drink? Shaking her head, she just said. You don't want to know. It was then that Naruto made his appearance. So drunk, how is the head feeling? Turning to face the boy to yell at him, Tazuna suddenly realized that his hangover was gone. Without saying anything, Tazuna started walking again, not looking at Naruto. As he passed Kakashi, they could all hear him mumbling about stupid mummies and not warning him. XXX. The group had walked the whole day, and about an hour before the sun had complete set the party brook to make camp. That night they had decided to set up camp in a small clearing about 30 feet away from the footpath. Not much had happened since Naruto had so kindly helped Tazuna with his hangover, though the old drunk had refused to say anything to Naruto since. It was shortly after they had finished setting up their tents that they noticed that Naruto didn't set one up for himself. Sakura, being the ever-curious person she was, took it upon herself to ask him where his tent was. The answer shocked them all and even got Tazuna's attention. Don't need one. My body produces so much raw chakra that it converts any I don't use into energy. I don't actually need to sleep more than an hour or so a week if I don't use chakra. None of them knew what to say to this. To have so much chakra that you didn't need to sleep was unheard of, but what was really scary was the amount of free time that Naruto must have. Just how much chakra do you have exactly, Naruto? Thinking for a moment, Naruto considered how best to answer. Well, according to the old man, about 13 times more than any Kage known to have ever lived. But I can't actually use most of it because I lack the level of control needed to use it effectively. So adjusting for the amount I waste when I cast any sort of technique, I would place my reserved at high chunin to low jonin. Even Tazuna was shocked at this. He might not be a ninja, but even he knew not to mess with a Kage. After a brief moment of silence, Sakura spoke up again due to her curiosity into what made Naruto tick. So if you don't sleep, what do you do with all the time that most people would be sleeping? Naruto shrugged his shoulders before looking up at the sky. I do a lot of things really. I tend to read anything I can get my hands on. I also have been practicing my fuinjutsu, and I usually work on my various projects a little or train when the mood strikes me. They all sat in silence after that, staring into the smokeless fire. No one really knew how to respond after that. After a few more minutes of this, Naruto reached behind his back and pulled out his violin. Without looking at any of the others in the clearing, he started to play. The music was soft and gentle, calm, the complete opposite of the one playing it, Naruto's face taking on a serene look as he played. They sat and listened to the boy play, watching the fire as it seemed to dance in the night. They were spellbound. None could move as they listened. But as the night went on, they knew that they needed to go to sleep. One by one they all got up and went to their tents to sleep. The last one to head off to sleep being Kakashi, but before he went into his tent he pulled out a jutsu scroll and placed it next to Naruto, who was still playing with his eyes closed. This technique should help you master anything you want faster if you can figure out how to use it. Kakashi turned and went into his tent. The sound of Naruto's violin the last thing they heard as they drifted off. None of them saw the single tear that trailed down Naruto's face as he played into the night. XXX. The next day they had all woke up to the sight of Naruto, leaning over a small pile of dead rabbits that Naruto had skinned the carcasses and was in the process of cutting up the meat in pieces to be cooked over the fire. After they ate breakfast, which was a surprisingly good rabbit stew, the group packed up camp and were on their way. The atmosphere was a lot calmer today. They were spread out in a loose formation and you could hear Sakura talking to Tazuna about wave country. It was then that the two Jonin noticed the puddle in the road ahead. The sight of it made Kurenai's blood boil, as it was such a poor attempt at a genjutsu that the genin should have been able to see through it. Looking at each other, the two sensei silently agreed to let the genin handle it. They didn't have to wait long. As soon as they passed the puddle, two men in brown cloaks jumped out and wrapped a battle chain around them. The genin and Tazuna turned around just in time to see their sensei fall to the ground in bloody pieces. 2 down. 6 to go. After saying this, the two ninjas started to run toward them, chain at the ready. Team 7 froze at the sight of the Jonin falling and didn't know what to do. Luckily, Team 8 did as Kurenai had desensitized death from Shino and Hinata by having them kill baby rabbits. Naruto didn't need any pushing to kill, as Kurenai had found out when he had simple ripped the head off the rabbit he was given without blinking an eye. In fact, he had just stared at Kurenai the entire time with a neutral expression. Shino and Hinata were in front of Tazuna as soon as they saw what happened, and Naruto had moved to intercept, pulling out his katanas from on his back as he went. Before the two ninja had went 2 meters towards them, Naruto was on them and made a slash at them. The demon brothers jumped back to avoid the slash, and both Naruto and the demon brothers paused to size the other up. With his back turned to the others, they didn't see Naruto's grin turn predatory and downright evil, but the demon brothers did. In fact, it stopped them in their tracks. They had seen this grin before, and it scared them that a boy had the same grin as him. They were brought out of their thoughts by the insane giggling and words laced in killing intent. Let's have fun. Try not to die too quickly. It has been ages since I had any real fun. That was all it took to anger the brothers. Who did this kid think he was saying that he was going to beat them? Yelling in rage, the two ran straight at the boy, intending to wrap him in their chain. But before they could, a kunai pinned it to a nearby tree. As they struggled to get the chain free, Naruto turned to Sasuke, who had managed to break out of his daze. Don't interfere with my fun. Do that again and I will rip out your precious eyes and shove them up your fucking ass until you can cough them up. None of the genin knew what to say. They had never seen Naruto like this. His grin was still in place, but his voice was hard, cold, and dripped in killing intent. But that wasn't all. When he turned to face the group, they all saw his features taking on an almost demonic look. His teeth had taken on the appearance of fangs, and his eyes had become red silted pits that had sunken back into his head. Turning back to his prey, Naruto was just in time to see them detach the chain from their gauntlets and charge at him again. What followed was one of the oddest kenjutsu battles any of them had ever seen. His grin stretching painfully large, Naruto switched the katana in his left hand to a reverse grip and disappeared in a flash to appear behind the brothers. Naruto slashed, making a small cut appear on both of them. The brothers moved to avoid Naruto, but Naruto was fast and would appear wherever they moved to deliver another cut. Every time one of the brothers got within Naruto's striking range, they would be pushed back, and before long the demon brothers were on full defense. No matter how fast the brothers seemed to move, Naruto was faster, and small cuts started to appear all over the demon brothers' bodies, and their movements started to get more and more sluggish. 10 minutes into the fight and the demon brothers dropped to the ground, their entire bodies littered with small, paper cut-like marks covering their bodies. Their clothes had been shredded, and they, like a book, had attacked them, as every cut appeared to be no more serious than a paper cut. When he saw that they couldn't fight anymore, Naruto stopped in front of them. He was a bit unsteady on his feet for a moment, but quickly got over it, put his katanas away and tied them up with ninja wire. Seeing that Naruto was finished with the enemy, the two thought-dead sensei stepped out of the woods. They explained how they had gotten away with a substitution jutsu before they turned to congratulate Naruto, only to see him positioning the brothers in a way that they were facing each other, tied to trees. When they were about to ask him what he was doing, he spoke. Now, which one of you is the brain of this partnership? The brothers were silent, but Naruto really didn't care. He turned to the older of the two brothers. You look like the man with the plan. So, you going to tell me why you attacked us? The only answer he got was the man was him spitting on the ground at Naruto's feet. Naruto's grin turned malicious, and without saying a word he turned to the other brother. When he was within arm reach, he spoke again. I was hoping you would say that. Lifting his hand up for all to see, he made his fingers change, turning into long, thin, worm-like tentacles. Seeing what the boy was planning, Kurenai quickly cast a genjutsu on the genin and Tazuna, so they went blind. But in her rush she forgot to make them deaf as well, so they could all hear the man's muffled screams as Naruto lowered his hand to his head and the tentacles made their way into his mouth, nose, and even under his skin. Kakashi and Kurenai watched in a sick fascination as they could see the man's skin start to move as the worms spread under it. Staring in horror at his older brother, the ninja could only watch as the lines moving under his skin seemed to go into a frenzy. Then, without warning, he stopped screaming and his entire body except for his head exploded in a shower of blood. Turning back to the now terrified ninja, Naruto slowly made his way over to his other captive, grinning insanely. All right, I'll tell you anything you want. For the next few minutes he told them everything, about Gato, Zabuza and everything he knew that he could think of came spilling out. When he was done, Naruto took out one of his katana, walked up to him and slit his throat in such a way that it took him several minutes to die from drowning due to blood filling his lungs. When the light left his eyes, Naruto used his blade to cut off the head. When he was done, Naruto took a sealing scroll from his bag and sealed both the severed heads into it along with the gauntlets the men had worn. When Naruto was done, he stood up and started to walk back towards everyone else. The blood on his clothes seemed to melt into them, and within minutes he was clean. Before Naruto made it back to the group, he stopped at the tree that had the barbed chain pinned by a kunai. Pulling the kunai out, Naruto examined the barbed chain quickly before coiling it up and attaching it to his waist. Kurenai and Kakashi just stared at Naruto, not sure what to think. It was the first time either of them had seen Naruto's bloodline in action, and it scared them what he could do with it. Kurenai now understood what the Hokage meant when he said Anbu were scared of his methods. Kakashi was the first to recover from his shock and walked past Naruto, who was currently admiring one of the demon brothers' gauntlets, and did a quick fire jutsu to get rid of what was left of the bodies. Kurenai snapped out of her shock when Kakashi called his jutsu and waited until there was nothing left before she released her illusion. But the smell of burned flesh lingered. After that, the Jonin talked with their charges and explained what had happened, leaving out the details, keeping in very general. Then they had quick talk with Tazuna. After Tazuna pleaded for their help, they decided to continue the mission as they couldn't allow a country to be oppressed like that, and since they had two teams with Jonin on the mission, they felt that they were more than equipped to handle anything that could happen. XXX. For the next few hours as they continued the trek towards Wave the, and before they set up camp for the night, no one said a word. Every now and then the genin would sneak glances at the blonde in the group when they thought he wasn't looking. None of the genin knew exactly what Naruto had done, since the Jonin refused to tell them anything beyond general information, but they knew from the screams it was bad. Kiba could still smell the blood that clung to Naruto like a blanket. Shortly after they finished setting up camp, Naruto left by simply walking into the forest. About an hour later he came back, hair wet and with a deer slung over his shoulder, the smell of blood still strong but from the deer instead of him. They all watched quietly as Naruto sat down on a nearby rock away from the fire and started to skin and prepare the meat from the deer with a small knife he had got from his bag. Every so often throwing a scrap piece or organ into the woods to unseen animals that had been attracted by the smell of blood. It was a clear night and the moon was full, casting an eerie glow on the insane boy as he did his work, humming to himself as he went. When he finished that, he went on to stripping the bark off of several branches to cook the meat over the fire. Not being able to stand the silence anymore, Kiba spoke in a quiet voice, drawing the attention of all those present. What the hell did you do to them back there? They only had small cuts. Why did they stop fighting? Naruto, turning to face the dog-like boy, his usual grin in place, answered. Have you ever got a paper cut? Seeing the boy nod his head, he continued. They hurt, don't they? Something so small, yet they can hurt as much as a kunai to the gut. Imagine having your entire body covered in them. Your face, arms, legs, torso, small cuts all over your body. What do you think would happen? It was Sasuke that answered first. It would start to slow you down, then the more cuts you get, the more pain. You can't fight if you are too focused on the pain. Turning his grin to Sasuke, Naruto nodded in approval. Exactly, and when the pain gets too much, your body stops on its own, leaving you completely vulnerable. This time it was Kakashi to ask the question. Where did you learn that? I've never heard of anyone fighting like you did. The speed was well insane, as it appeared you were flashing from point to point, and the precise aim so you only broke the skin when you cut. It seems like the perfect style for capturing an opponent while causing the most amount of pain, while at the same time it could be turned into a full-on offensive at a moment's notice, capable of quickly overpowering anyone that doesn't know how to counter the style. Naruto just nodded at the assessment of his style. Yep, sounds about right. I'm still working a few bugs out of it, but that pretty much sums it up, and I didn't learn it, I made it. I took the idea from a technique and an old style of kenjutsu. Working in conjunction, they create a truly hard-to-counter style. This didn't surprise Team 8 as much as the others. They had gotten used to Naruto and the way he seemed brilliant one minute and like an idiot the next. Nothing more was said for a while after that. Team 7 were a bit confused at Naruto's somewhat subdued attitude. In the short time they had known him, he had never been this calm. He still let out a giggle from time to time, but other than that, nothing. While they had been talking, Naruto had put the meat on the sticks and started to cook them, the smell filling the camp. When they were done, Naruto handed them out and sat back down on the rock from earlier. When he had finished his own meat, he put the stick down and pulled out his violin again. He had just started playing when Sasuke spoke. "Can you teach me your style?" Naruto didn't stop playing, leveling his gaze on the young Uchiha. Kakashi was about to tell Sasuke that he was being rude when he was stopped by the blonde. "Sure. Why not? We'll need to get you some weapons to use until I can make you something, but I don't have a problem with it. Actually, I think I have something here you can use." Putting down his violin and reaching into his bag, Naruto pulled out a scroll. Unrolling and putting his hand on one of the seals, a moment later there was a puff of smoke and in his hands were two beautifully crafted katana. The blades were only 2 foot long, with seals carved onto their length from tip to handle. They had no guard and the handles were wrapped in a fine red silk. The sheaths were made out of wood that had been stained black. After giving them a quick inspection, Naruto threw them over to Sasuke. Catching the blade, Sasuke's eyes widened at the skill shown in the making of them. He turned back to Naruto when the boy started speaking again. "They were one of the first things I made and it was the prototype to the katana I have now. The seals make the metal strong and the blade shape should work for you just fine." Sasuke just stared at the weapons in his lap. Looking up at Naruto, he nodded and said just 2 words. "Thank you." Naruto just nodded at him. Then, picking up his violin, started to play again. Just like the night before, they all fell asleep to the sound of Naruto playing his violin. The next morning, after they had finished the rabbits Naruto had killed, the 2 Jonin sat the group down and explained about Zabuza. Needless to say, Naruto was the only one grinning at the end. "So you're saying he's a demon?" asked a slightly shaking Sakura. Turning to his student, Kakashi replied. "Pretty much." An air of depression started to leak out of the genin. But this didn't last long. Potato. This caused them all to sweat drop. Turning to Naruto, Kurenai asks. "Should I even bother to ask?" "Probably not." Shaking their heads, they returned to the conversation. "Anyway, as we were saying, when Zabuza shows himself, you all stay with Tazuna while Kurenai and I fight him. You will not engage Zabuza. If something happens to us, you run, understand?" The last part was directed at Naruto. "That's stupid." Raising his one visible eyebrow, Kakashi motioned for Naruto to continue. "If this guy is as strong as you say, then how can we outrun him if he kills both of you?" That stopped both of the older ninja in their tracks. He was right. After that, they started to plan what to do if both the Jonin failed and continued on their way to Wave XXX. They had crossed the waterway into Wave about an hour ago, and so far everything was going fine. At least no one had tried to kill them on the way across. Naruto had taken to walking on his hands instead of his feet shortly after they got off the boat. Ever since the Demon Brothers, they had started to be a lot more formal in the way they guarded Tazuna. Currently they were set up in a circle formation around him, Kurenai and Kakashi at the back, Naruto at the front and the others at the sides. "Naruto, I think you should walk on your feet again, we could be attacked at any minute." Pouting, Naruto did as he was told and started to walk normally. It was a few hours later when they found themselves in a thick mist that made it hard to see more than 10 foot in any direction. They knew instantly that it was Zabuza. Hinata could see the tiny particles of chakra mixed in with the mist, and Zabuza was known to be a master of the silent killing technique. All that they were waiting for Zabuza to show himself or for him to make his move. The mist caused a big problem though. Not only did it make it hard to see, but according to Kurenai it made it almost impossible to cast her genjutsu, something about the chakra in the air messing with it, the chakra she would use to cast. This meant that when he did make his move, Kakashi was on his own. Since Kurenai wasn't amazing at taijutsu, she could hold her own, but Kakashi and Zabuza are well above her. They continued on their way, pretending that they weren't waiting for an attack. Then Kakashi heard it, the sound of something moving through the air at high speeds. Grabbing Tazuna, he yelled, "Get down!" Instantly everyone hit the deck, heads down. Everyone except Naruto, who had jumped up instead of dropping to the ground. As he was coming back down, instead of landing on the ground, he found himself spinning through the air on a giant sword. Naruto laughed as if he was riding a carnival ride. Eventually he stopped when it struck a tree and got stuck. That was fun. Getting off the sword, he wobbled for a moment, but before he could regain his balance, he was kicked hard in the back towards his team. Hey, that wasn't nice. Tell someone who gives a damn. Zabuza was tall as Naruto, but unlike Naruto, he was covered in muscles. He didn't wear a shirt, just gray and black cameo pants, gray arm warmers, and his slashed headband slightly tilted to one side. His voice was low and slightly muffled by the bandages that covered his face. But Naruto only saw one thing. Dude, what happened to your eyebrows? Even with the current situation, all those in the area face planted in the ground. When Zabuza picked himself up, he had a tick mark on his forehead. What the hell did you just say, you mummy? You're one to talk. The two stared at each other for a moment, and then both burst out laughing. None of the others knew what to make of it. 1 minute they were at each other's throats, and then they were laughing together. When they had both calmed down, Zabuza wiped a tear from his eye and said, "You're all right, kid, for a genin. But I've got a mission to complete, so hand over the old man and you can all walk away." "No can do. No brow, I got a mission as well." Silently nodding his head at the boy, Zabuza turned to Kakashi. "So are we going to do this? Or do you want to trade insults for a bit?" Taking out a kunai and lifting his headband, Kakashi just stared at the missing ninja. Without saying anything else, the two met in a clash of steel, Kakashi with his kunai and Zabuza with his zanbato. It was a few minutes later that Zabuza gained the advantage, sending Kakashi into a nearby lake that none of them had seen through the mist and trapping him in a sphere of water. He then made 20 water clones and had them charge the group. Running forward so that the real Zabuza would be in range, Kurenai sent 3 shots at Zabuza at high speed. Unfortunately, without using genjutsu, it was easy for the missing ninja to dodge the bullets and appear behind Kurenai, only to kick her onto the lake as well. Before she knew it, Kurenai was in the same predicament as Kakashi, only this time it was a clone that had her trapped. At a silent command from their creator, the clones went speeding towards the genin and bridge builder. This time, unlike with the demon brothers, none of the genin froze. Naruto and Sasuke ran to meet the clones before they could get to the others, while the other genin stayed to protect Tazuna. Pulling his katanas from his back, Naruto met the clones and started to flash from place to place. Sasuke, not having the chance to use the swords fixed to his back, chose to use a kunai in each hand. As he watched the two boys finish off his clones, Zabuza sent a curious look at the blonde. He could tell there was something different about him. If he was honest with himself, he reminded him of himself. It was this thought that made him laugh. "I've got to say, I didn't think you wimps in Konoha had it in you." He could just hear Kakashi's reply. "What are you talking about? Don't bullshit me, Kakashi. I know what it looks like when someone has had their mind broken. That kid has the same look in his eyes that I did at his age. The skills, the attitude, even the smile. You people have the makings of a true monster in that boy." He got no answer to this, which made him laugh again. But what he didn't realize was that he was so caught up in his conversation with Kakashi that he didn't see Naruto flash his way over to him and his captive. Just before one of the katana slit his stomach open, Zabuza jumped back away from the young psychopath. As soon as the jutsu was released, Kakashi sent a kunai at the clone that held Kurenai, destroying it, before he turned to resume his fight with the real Zabuza. Before the two could start again, Kurenai grabbed Naruto by the hood on the back of his straitjacket and jumped back to the group. The fight didn't last long after that. Both ninjas sent a water dragon at each other and Zabuza was sent flying into a tree. Slowly making his way to the downed Zabuza, kunai in hand, Kakashi prepared to make the finishing blow. He never got the chance. Before he could finish what he started, 3 Senbon were seen sticking out of the missing ninja's neck. His eyes widened before going blank. Putting the kunai away, Kakashi stepped to the body and checked for a pulse. When he found none, he turned his head to a random tree and said, "Thank you for the assistance, Hunter-san." Before anyone could ask who he was talking to, a masked ninja jumped out of the tree and moving towards the body. The hunter had on a sage blue battle kimono, with their long brown hair tied up in a bun. The mask was mostly blank, except for the eye holes and the Kiri sign on the forehead. Nobody noticed the grin on Naruto's face stretch wider as the hunter passed him. Nodding at Kakashi, the hunter bent down to pick up the body and, without saying a word, body flickered away. Pulling down his forehead protector to cover his eye, Kakashi turned to the group. "Well done, you guys. Great teamwork, and thanks Naruto, you saved my life. Now, if one of you could carry me the rest of the way to Tazuna's house, I'm going to sleep for a bit." The second Kakashi said this, he fell to the ground, unconscious. Running over and checking her fellow Jonin, Kurenai let out her breath and said to the others, "It's all right. He's just suffering from chakra exhaustion. A few days and he will be fine." Before anyone could say anything, Naruto walked up and grabbed Kakashi by his feet. Before they could ask what he was doing, Naruto started to drag him the way they had been going before Zabuza attacked. When he was a few meters away, he turned back to the group. They were all just stood there, staring at him. What I do? XXX. About an hour later they arrived at Tazuna's house. Kakashi was being carried by Sasuke and Kiba, who had taken him after Naruto had wanted to drag him all the way there. They were all sat around in the living room of the house. Kakashi had been put in a spare room in Tazuna's house and he had regained consciousness a few minutes earlier. He had just finished telling them about how his eye used a lot of chakra, which was why he had chakra exhaustion when he brought up Zabuza. At least now that Zabuza is out of the picture, I doubt we will have any more ninja of his caliber to worry about. Naruto, is there a reason you're laughing like that, or is it just you again? Partway through his talk, Naruto had started to roll around on the floor, banging his hand on the floor and holding his sides as he laughed and giggled. "Ha ha ha ha. You actually believe, ha ha ha, that Zabuza is dead, he he he." This confused the others in the room. When Naruto had calmed down, Kakashi asked him what he meant. All he said was, "That wasn't a hunter ninja." Both Kakashi and Kurenai's faces took on a contemplating look. Then, something clicked into place. Kurenai slapped a hand to her face and Kakashi just said, "Shit." Turning to the still confused Genin, Kurenai explained. Hunter ninjas are required to remove the head and destroy the body of any missing ninja they kill at the site of death, no exceptions outside of a battlefield. Nodding his head, Kakashi continued. "But the one that took Zabuza's body didn't. They took him away. We can only assume that they were working together and the fake hunter put him into a near-death state. This means they will be back." The Genin got scared looks on their faces at his words. "Naruto, if you knew about the hunter, why didn't you say anything? You were dead on your feet." Kurenai still couldn't use her genjutsu. "The rest of us are Genin, and if Zabuza trusts this person to pull his ass out of trouble, they have to be good enough to be a threat. So why do you think I didn't say anything? Besides, this just gives us another shot at them where we can be better prepared for an attack." Nodding his head at the logic, Kakashi moved on. "Fair enough. Now, we need to discuss what we are going to do. From the injuries he gained from our fight and the stress from being put into a near-death state, Zabuza should be out of commission for about a month. Tazuna, how long will it take for you to finish your bridge?" Thinking on it for a moment, the old man said, "A little over a month as long as work continues at the pace it has been going." Nodding his head, Kakashi went on. "Right, which means we are almost guaranteed to run into him again. We have a month. It's not much, but it's something." Nodding her head, Kurenai spoke. "From now until then, we will be taking shifts. 2 of you will be training with me and Kakashi, 2 will be guarding Tazuna and the other 2 will be guarding Tazuna's family. We can switch every 2 days. They all nodded their heads at this. Potato. Again they all stared at Naruto, who just shrugged. Shaking his head at the strange blonde, Tazuna said. I just want to thank you for all you're doing for us. If it wasn't for you, I would never have made it this far. Don't worry about it, you old drunk. If we didn't help you, then we wouldn't be any better than Gato. Everyone in the room nodded at this, agreeing with the crazy genin. XXX. They were all sat around a table in Tazuna's house with his daughter Tsunami, and her son Inari. Tsunami was a beautiful young woman in her late 20s with shoulder-length black hair and a gentle smile. She had an amazing figure for a civilian and was very welcoming to the guests in her home. Inari, on the other hand, had an air of defeat surrounding him. He had a plain white shirt underneath a set of green overalls. His brown hair was covered by a white hat and his skin was very pale. Obviously he didn't spend much time outside. He also gave all the ninja the cold shoulder. No one said anything as they eat the small meal. They felt a little bad that they were eating so much of the family's food when they had so little. As soon as he finished, Inari ran upstairs to his room without saying a word to his mother. Turning to the ninja, Tsunami apologized to them all. Sorry about him. He was never able to get over Kaisa's death. Seeing the questioning looks on their faces, Tazuna explained about how Kaisa had opposed Gato and had been publicly executed. Kaisa was also really close to Inari and Inari saw him as his surrogate father. It was a sad story, and it got to all of them, even if they didn't all show it. After a few minutes of silence, Naruto stood up and went to the front door. Seeing he was going, Kurenai asks, Naruto, where are you going? He didn't turn to face them, just looked over his shoulder with his usual grin on his face. The roof. Without saying anything else, he left. Those left in the room said nothing. Then they heard it, Naruto's violin. Like all the other times they heard him play, it was a soft, sad melody. Tsunami was shocked, this being the first time she had heard the young boy play. It was a beautiful sound and very well played, but it didn't seem right to her for someone that hadn't stopped smiling since he had got there to play a song that held such sadness and pain. Why does he play such sad music? He seems like such a happy boy. All the other people in the room stared at her for a moment before Kiba said, Happy? He's fucking insane. They all nodded their heads in agreement at this, which caused Tsunami to frown. That's not a nice thing to say about someone. Shino took it upon himself to explain what they meant, as it appeared Kiba's came off more as an insult than a fact. I'm sorry, Miss Tsunami, but I think you misunderstood. We weren't insulting him. He is actually insane. He spent the last 6 years of his life in a mental institution built to house insane ninja. He was released a few months ago to become a ninja. Both Tsunami and Tazuna were shocked to hear this. But it was Tazuna that asked the next question. If he is insane, then why the hell is he a ninja? Isn't that, I don't know, unsafe? Both Jonin shared a look before Kurenai said. There are certain things that we are not at liberty to saying. I'm afraid this is one of them. But let's just say Naruto isn't a threat to his allies, but I would hate to be his enemy. With that said, they all just sat there for a while listening to Naruto playing. Naruto continued to play well into the night and he was still playing when they all went to bed. XXX. The next morning when they woke, they were all surprised at what they found Naruto doing in the kitchen with Tsunami. Like when they had been traveling, Naruto had been hunting while they slept, but whereas before he had caught a few rabbits and a deer, last night he had caught what seemed like the entire forest that surrounded the area. The room was full of dead rabbits, about 20 different birds and 5 deer. The two were in the middle of skinning and plucking the carcasses and cutting up the meat. None of them knew what to make of it. They all just assumed that when they got here he would stop hunting. When he saw them all just stood there staring, his grin grew. What? Stepping forward, Kurenai explained their confusion. Naruto, why did you go hunting? I could understand when we were traveling, but why now? He just started laughing. Ha ha ha. Gato has a stronghold on the whole island and controls what supplies get onto the island due to his shipping company. Tsunami here hasn't been able to shop for decent food for a while, and now that we are all here she didn't have enough food. So I went hunting to compensate for us staying here. Again, none of them knew what to say to this. It had never occurred to them that Tsunami couldn't shop for food. Tazuna was nearly in tears at what the blonde had done. For the next hour they all sat and helped, except Kakashi and Inari. While they were doing this, Kurenai thought about the plan. She realized it was not a good idea to leave any of the genin unsupervised. So as there were working, she told them all her changes. They would still be in teams of 2, but she would go to the bridge with Tazuna's guard, while Kakashi would supervise the training. The other thing was that Kakashi would need to stay within hearing distance of the house in case anything happened. They all agreed, and the Jonin told them the teams for the foreseeable future and what they would do first. Hiba with Shino would be the first to guard the bridge with Kurenai. Sakura and Hinata would be the first to train with Kakashi, and Sasuke along with Naruto would look after Tsunami and Inari. About an hour before they set off for their respective assignments, Tsunami asked if it was okay for her to go into the village to try and find any vegetables that she might be able to buy. After considering it for a moment, Kurenai agreed that Naruto could go while Sasuke stayed to watch the house and Inari. This did not sit well with the Uchiha, but he just nodded his head and agreed. An hour later, Tazuna and his guard for the next 2 days set off for the bridge while Kakashi took Sakura and Hinata just inside the woods for their training. The 3 stayed in the kitchen to finish as Inari sulked in a corner of the room. When they were done with the animals, Naruto took all the organs that they couldn't use outside and dumped them in a circle around the house. Watching him, Tsunami asked what he was doing. Feeding my friends. I met a small pack of wolves when I was hunting and made a deal. I spread out some food for them and they will help guard the house. Nice bunch. After they tried to kill me, they were very sorry. Hee hee. You can talk to wolves. Wait, did you say they tried to kill you? I can communicate with most animals. With my bloodline to change my body, all I have to do is alter my vocal cords and a few parts of my brain. Simple. What's a bloodline? Something that only I can do thanks to a genetic trait. And the trying to kill you part. Naruto just shrugged and started doing backflips until he hit a tree. Ow. Giggling as he stood up, Naruto went back into the house. See what we meant last night when we said he was insane. Looking behind her, Tsunami saw Sasuke a few paces away. Not saying anything, she turned to head back to the house with a worried look on her face. XXX. Naruto and Tsunami were walking down the road towards the village. They hadn't really talked much since the whole wolf conversation. She just didn't know what to say to the young boy. Over the last few years she had seen a lot of things, like men and women killing themselves and their families just so they wouldn't suffer. Or on the rare occasions that Gato and his men returned one of the women they took and they came back as empty shells. But Naruto was different. He had this aura around him. At first she had mistaken it for happiness, but after she talked to the other ninja she realized that it was his insanity. Whatever made him like this, it was so bad that you could practically see it. It made her sad to look at him. He seemed like such a nice boy, a little, okay, a lot strange, but still nice. He was walking a little way in front of her, hands folded behind his head. A few minutes later they were entering the town. A lot of people had lost their homes over the last few years because of Gato. Many of the houses were falling apart, or in some cases already fell down. The streets were full of people, both young and old, and if you looked carefully you could see some of them were dead. Tsunami tried not to look around at the people lying in the street. Naruto on the other hand looked at everything with a smile on his face. After wandering around for a while they finally found a stand that had some only slightly out-of-date products. It was then that Naruto said something that shocked her. This reminds me of when I was little, rotten food at high prices, the smell of hopelessness in the air, or that might actually be that guy over there. I think he's starting to go out of date too. Tsunami didn't know what to say to this. Konoha was supposed to be the nicest and wealthiest place to live in all of the elemental nations. How could this remind him of his childhood? Before she could ask him what he meant, Naruto had walked away. XXX. It was on their way out of the village that Naruto noticed a building that stood out from the rest. Unlike those around it, this building was not in disrepair, and the general populace seemed to be avoiding it. The building wasn't very good to look at, seeing as was basically a giant box and lacked any sort of creative flair, but it was in one piece, had a fairly new paint job and a front door, which was more than could be said for most of the buildings around it. Hey, Tsunami-san, what's in there? Following his line of sight, her face took on a mixture of hatred and fear. That's one of Gato's buildings. He made it for his thugs. It's where they take the women they find in the village that they take a shine to in. She didn't finish. She didn't need to. Then she saw a strange look on Naruto's face. It was like he was struggling to keep his grin. Without saying anything, he started towards the building with a slow walk, leaving her where she stood as the people around then all watching on silently as he crossed the street towards the building. When he came to the door, Naruto picked up his left foot and slammed it into the closed door, which flew off its hinges, and walked inside. The inside was nothing but a big room with sofas and beds. To one side of the room there were several women chained naked to a wall of all ages. The oldest looked to be in her late 30s and the youngest being around his own age. Even though it was the middle of the day, the room was full of men that were probably in Gato's employment, about 50, all with a woman. The air reeked of sex, fear, alcohol and cigar smoke. It was almost enough to make the young boy gag if he hadn't smelled far worse. After the thugs got over their shock, they started to get up and surround Naruto. When they had him covered on all sides, a very large, very fat man stepped forward. "You've got a death wish or something." His words were slightly slurred. He was obviously drunk. It was then that the thugs saw something that hadn't been seen in years. Naruto stopped grinning. His insane grin slipped into a cold stone poker face that kept what he was feeling hidden. The air in the room seemed to get colder and all the thugs took a step back. He didn't say anything, just stood there, looking around the room with cold, calculating eyes. When nothing happened, the thugs started to get their confidence back. The fat man from before walked up to Naruto, but because of the young boy's height he was only a few inches taller than the boy. "Maybe you didn't hear me. I said, you've got a death wish." He never finished. As soon as the man had gotten close, Naruto had thrust his hand forward and through the man's stomach. He was still alive, but in a lot of pain. All the thugs in the room were shocked. Leaning forwards, Naruto put his mouth next to the man's ear and said loud enough for all of them to hear, "You have no idea." Without saying another word, Naruto gave a sharp pull and ripped out a long white object from the man's body. The man gave one last shuddering breath, and then fell over. In Naruto's hand for all to see was what was left of the man's spine, and yet Naruto didn't show any reaction. His face stayed impassive the whole time, until he dropped it. It was like someone had thrown a switch in his head. Slowly a smile grew in his face, and then it turned into a grin. They could hear the giggles in his throat as they became full-blown laughter. Then he started to change. XXX. Outside a small crowd had gathered, but they couldn't see inside because none of them dared to get closer. Tsunami. Turning around to see who called her, Tsunami saw her father running to her side, Kurenai, Kiba and Shino right behind. "Dad, what the hell's going on?" One of the villagers came to the bridge screaming about something happening. "It's Naruto. I don't know what happened. 1 minute he was here and then he was kicking the door down." At the mention of Naruto, Kurenai pushed Tazuna out of the way and grabbed Tsunami by the shoulders, her eyes wide. "What is in that building?" With a shaking voice, Tsunami told her what she told Naruto. Kurenai's eyes widened even more in understanding. Then they heard the laughter, followed by the screams of terror. "Shit. XXX. It was like every other time he changed. The pain, the feeling of every cell in his body screaming in agony. Oh, how he loved it." As the men watched, Naruto started to get thinner and taller, but his body stayed the same size. His arms and legs seemed to be stretching. His clothes melded into his skin and turned into a patchy brown, cloth-like material. His eyes changed into big, round, black buttons that looked like they had been sewn onto his face. Lastly, his mouth sewed itself together into a malicious grin that stretched across his whole face. When he was done changing, he towered over all the thugs at about 11 foot. His arms as long as he was tall and trailed along the floor. The only way any of them could describe him was a giant ragdoll. They could still hear him giggling, although it was muffled by his lips being sewn together. No one in the room moved until the doll reached behind its back and showed them all the black, serrated scythes it now held. When it moved, it was like watching a puppet show. its limbs were boneless, turning its head a full 360 feet to look at each of them. The dam broke and all the thugs threw themselves at their weapons. What happened next was a mass of flying limbs and blood. The ragdoll seemed to be just that, a ragdoll. It could bend in any way it wanted, twisting and bending around the thugs as they tried desperately to kill it. It never stopped giggling the whole time they fought, and with each swing of its arms another thug would fall with limbs missing, but none of them were dead. Before long there was only one thug left standing. He was nothing special, brown hair and eyes that were filled with fear. The doll was covered in blood from all the other thugs that lay around them, and there was a pool of blood covering the floor. He was frozen to the spot as the doll made its way over to him on wobbly legs. But it didn't even turn to him. It walked over to the girls chained to the wall. They shrank away from it in fear as it reached out, only to cut their chains with its scythes. One by one the doll cut the girls free and watched as they ran out the door with all the others. The thug saw his chance when it had its back to him and ran forward and stabbed it in the lower back with his knife. The ragdoll made no sign that it could feel the knife. Slowly it started to lean back. It leaned so far that its head was in front of the thug upside down. Falling back on his ass, the thug tried to crawl away but stopped when the doll's mouth started to force its way open. Tell Gato, I'm coming for him. Its voice was rough, like dry leaves rustling together. The thug just nodded quickly and ran out the door in a panic. Standing back up straight, the doll looked around at the men lying on the floor groaning in pain. Seeing them suffer brought another giggle to the doll's throat. Naruto. Turning its head again, the doll saw a crowd gathering outside the building. Stood at the front was Kurenai, Shino and Kiba, along with Tazuna and Tsunami. Turning the rest of its body to face the group, the doll slowly made its way over and stopped a few feet away, its head tilted to one side as it stared at Kurenai with its button eyes. Can you still understand me? Nodding its head slowly at her, Kurenai let out a sigh of relief. Good, now I need you to cancel your shift, okay? She spoke slowly, making sure each word was clear. It nodded its head, but before it changed back to Naruto it turned to the thugs in the room. Forcing its mouth open again, but this time, instead of speaking it blew out a thick, black ash with embers floating in it. Kurenai could feel the heat coming from the ash, from where she stood in the doorway as it filled the room. They could all hear the screams of the thugs as they were burned alive by the heat, then nothing. Turning back to the crowd, the doll made its way towards them and out the door. The crowd all backed up when they saw it walking towards them. When it was out of the building they could all clearly see the thick layer of blood that coated its body. Slowly it started to turn back into Naruto. All the people stared at the boy in shock. Like the doll, he was covered in blood from head to toe and had almost the exact same grin on his face. I regret nothing. With those 3 words he fell face first into the road. XXX. When Naruto woke up he found that he was in a small room, the same one that they kept Kakashi in when he had fainted. Getting up he found that he was in a clean white shirt and black pants. He still had his bandages on, thankfully, but he still wondered where his clothes were. Heading downstairs he found all the Konoha ninja along with Tazuna and Tsunami, who was holding his freshly cleaned clothes. Taking the clothes from the woman with a nod he went back up to change. When he came down a few minutes later they all just stared at him. Looking at each in turn he said, "One fine day in the middle of the night. 2 dead men got up to fight. Back to back they faced each other. Raised their swords and shot each other. They all face planted. After getting back up Kakashi spoke. Naruto, what you did was reckless. You could have been killed." Naruto just laughed at this. "I wish it were that simple to kill me." The room went deadly quiet at his words, until Tsunami asks. "What do you mean you wish? Don't you even care if you live or die?" "Nope, but honestly it would take quite a bit of force to kill me." Tears filled her eyes when he said this. "So how long was I out?" Kurenai was the one to answer this time. 2 hours. "Why did you do it?" They all turned to Tsunami again. They all knew what she meant by it. Turning to face her, Naruto got one of his rare real smiles. "Some people need to die. What they were doing was wrong. I hate people like them." Turning to face the genin, Naruto continued. It's like I said, the things I hate are never around for long. After saying this, his grin came back. Nodding to himself, Naruto headed for the door. Where are you going? Roof. Without another word, he left the room. And just like the night before, a few minutes later, they heard him playing his violin. Getting up, Tsunami wiped her eyes and turned to Kakashi and Kurenai. I don't know what happened to make him like this, to make him wish for death, but I think I have an idea. Did you know that people say that Konoha is the best place to live in the elemental nations? If that was true, then why, when we were walking around town, did he say that it reminded him of when he was young? Everyone in the room was shocked at this, except Kakashi and Kurenai. Both Jonin looked away, unable to meet her eye. That's what I thought. I saw your face today, Kurenai-san. When I said Naruto had gone into that place, I saw the fear in your eyes. I don't know how things work in a ninja village, but whatever that village did to him, well, I hope you are all ashamed of whatever it was, because that boy has done more for this village than anyone since my husband died. It was then that Kakashi looked up at Tsunami. His eye was so full of regret that it made her gasp. You have no idea. XXX. Hardly anyone spoke to each other the next morning. None of them really knew what to say. Naruto and Tsunami were talking in the kitchen about different ways to cook the meat he had caught during the night. The older woman was going out of her way to learn as much about the boy as possible. She didn't ask about his past, not wanting to bring it up in case it scared him off. So Naruto, how do you know so much about hunting? It's what I do in the village for food. Tsunami stopped washing the dishes to look at Naruto when he said this. What do you mean? All the others in the room looked at him from the corner of their eyes, waiting for an explanation. Well, I am not particularly liked in the village, and since I was released, I had to find a place to live. Due to the village hating my guts, no one will rent me an apartment, so I live in a forest. Nice place, really. No one goes there because of the fence around the place, and I love the feel of nature around me. Everyone looked at him in shock for a few moments before Kurenai and Kakashi decided to take their temporary teams, leaving Naruto and Sasuke alone with Tsunami and Inari. After what had happened the day before, Kurenai decided that it would be best for them not to leave, which everyone but Naruto agreed with. At some point, through unspoken agreement, Naruto was put with Tsunami while Sasuke would guard Inari. Sasuke didn't have a problem with this because Inari never left his room. For the entire morning, Tsunami would ask Naruto questions. Sometimes she would get answers, other times Naruto would remain silent. One thing she did notice was that when he explained something, he got very serious and took on a more lecturing tone. There was the occasional mad moment, like when he started juggling knives, badly, but she soon got used to it. If there was one thing Tsunami learned, it was that Naruto was smarter than he looked, the way he explained things in such detail. It was amazing. But there was no denying he was insane. Sometimes she would hear him talk to himself under his breath, or he would just start laughing at nothing. At one point she could have sworn that she saw him cut himself on the arm with a knife out of the corner of her eye. But when she turned to look at him fully, there was no sign of there ever being one. It was the afternoon when Tsunami finally asked him about the day before. She wasn't planning on bringing it up, but something had been bothering her. Naruto, can I ask you something about yesterday? Seeing him nod, she continued. What was that thing you became? I've never heard of a ninja doing something like that. It looked like something out of a nightmare. Turning to face her completely, he grinned. That's exactly what it was. Seeing that she didn't understand, Naruto just laughed and went on. Remember when I said I had a bloodline, something that only I can do? Well, that was it. I can become anything. The only limitations are my chakra and my imagination, that and a high healing factor. The thing you saw yesterday, that creature, was from one of my nightmares. Tsunami was shocked. To be able to do something like that was incredible. Why use a nightmare? Why not an animal or something like that? I use my nightmares as inspiration. I let my enemies feel true fear before I kill them. Besides, why not share my fears and let those that oppose me fear them too? Tsunami really didn't know what to say to that. Can I see? Nodding his head, Naruto lifted up his hand. Slowly, the bandages melted into his flesh and were replaced by thick, wiry black fur. His fingers stretched and his hand grew to about the size of his head. Thick claws grew at the ends of his fingers, curved at the tips into hooks. When it stopped, Naruto's hand was completely changed into an animalistic claw. Tsunami just stared at it for a long moment. She didn't actually see him change the day before and was fascinated. Reaching out her hand, she stopped just centimeters from touching it. "May I?" Again he just nodded his head, never taking his eyes off her face. Closing the distance between their hands, she was slightly surprised by how soft it was. It felt just like a dog's coat. The claws were razor sharp, perfect for tearing flesh from bone. The whole time she was looking at her hand, Naruto was watching how she would react. "Does it hurt?" He grinned insanely at her question. "It is the second most painful thing I have ever felt." With that, he pulled his hand back and started to walk away to do a perimeter check, his hand changing back to normal as he went. Before he left, Tsunami asked one more question. "What was the first?" He just laughed and went outside. XXX. They were all at the table for dinner. Naruto made it and had used the meat from several different animals to make something he called game stew. When hearing it was Naruto's recipe, the others were a little scared to taste it. At first, Tazuna refused to eat it until Tsunami threatened to force it down his throat. He could still remember the burning in his throat from the hangover cure. But Tsunami assured them that the stew was good. No one but Naruto and Tsunami were eating. They all just stared at the bowl of lumpy liquid in front of them. Seeing that they weren't eating, Naruto put his spoon down and looked at all of them. "Eat it or I'll dye all your hair different colors while you sleep. Take picture and have them posted all over Konoha." They instantly grabbed their spoons and swallowed a mouthful before they could think it through. All their eyes widened at the taste. It was good. The meat was tender and melted in the mouth, the seasoning was perfect and the broth was delicious. Seeing their reactions, Naruto laughed and started eating again. None of them spoke as they ate. Even Inari seemed to be enjoying the meal. When they were all finished, they all stared at Naruto before Kurenai asked where he learned to cook like that. "Trial and error. First time I tried cooking, I couldn't shit for a week. But I have actually been refining what I know by watching Tsunami cook." Nodding their heads weakly, they all went to the sitting room while Tsunami washed the dishes, except Inari, who went to his room. A few minutes later, Naruto pulled out a small orange book from his back pocket and started flipping through the pages at a fast pace. When he didn't stop, Sakura asked what he was doing. Without taking his eyes away from the book, he said in a flat tone, "Reading." The pink-haired girl was confused when he said this. "But you're just flipping through the pages." He didn't respond to this and kept flipping. It was then that Kakashi noticed the title of the book and his eyes widened. "Naruto. Where did you get that book?" "Your bag." "Oh. This was so not good." Turning to Kurenai, Kakashi shrank back in fear. She was staring at him with fury in her eyes and a dark aura surrounding her. But before she could kill him for corrupting her student, Naruto closed the book after finishing it, got up from his chair and went over to Kakashi, book in hand. For a moment, Kakashi thought he would be like any healthy man and get down on his knees and cry tears of joy. What he didn't expect was for Naruto to slam it down on his head so hard he saw stars. "If I catch you reading this smut again, I'll strip you naked, hog tie you, tattoo pervert on your chest and throw you into a kunoichi-only bathhouse. Understand?" To emphasize his point, Naruto kicked the one-eyed Jonin between the legs, causing all the other males in the room to wince. Kakashi's eye went wide and he let out a high-pitched scream as he curled into a ball on the floor. Nodding his head in satisfaction, Naruto went to the door and left. When he was gone, Sasuke walked over to his sensei to make sure he was okay. Turning to Kurenai, Shino asks, "What exactly is in that book?" Shaking her head and looking down at Kakashi, Kurenai wondered if it would be overkill to kick him herself. "Something that if any woman sees you reading, they will kick your ass. Though I am glad Naruto seems immune to the rotten thing." Nodding their heads, Kiba, Shino and Sasuke backed away from Kurenai. XXX. The next day found Kakashi, Sasuke and Naruto at the edge of the forest that surrounded Tazuna's house. Today they would be training, the girls would be with Tazuna and Kiba and Shino would guard the house. Turning to face the two boys, Kakashi told them what they would be doing. Okay. Since Naruto agreed to teach Sasuke his fighting style, I thought we could work on that. Nodding his head, Naruto gave Kakashi a piece of paper. What's this? A list of things I need to start teaching him. Shrugging his shoulders, Kakashi skimmed over the list. Naruto, why do you need a rope, a rotten fish, and a bucket? Naruto just grinned and made his way towards a tree. 10 minutes later, after Kakashi had gathered what Naruto needed, Sasuke was starting to regret asking for the blonde's help. He was currently hanging upside down with his arms and legs tied so he couldn't untie himself, and a rotten fish tied to his head. He could feel the blood rushing to his head and was starting to fall ill from the smell of the fish. Walking up to the Uchiha, Naruto looked over all the knots and placed the bucket under his head. Kakashi was off to one side watching with a critical eye. Okay, everything seems to be good, now we can start. Grabbing Sasuke's arm, Naruto started to walk around, slowly spinning him until the rope wouldn't turn anymore. Having enough of the blonde making a fool out of him, Sasuke yelled. How the hell is this supposed to teach me to fight, you fucking asshole? Calm down, duck ass. You want my help or not? I'm not sure anymore. When he said this, Naruto smacked him in the back of the head. Shut up. Now the reason we are doing this is because you need to get so dizzy you puke. This made Sasuke's eyes widen in sudden fear. He looked at the rope and then at the bucket underneath him. What the hell? My style is all about insane amounts of speed and using the momentum you keep building to increase your attack and defense. You saw when I used it, I seemed to flash from point to point. Well, you need to be able to handle it moving at high speeds before I teach you how to move that fast. Since the drawback to this is that it makes you dizzy and nauseous when you use it, and especially when you stop, I'm going to start with building up your tolerance to motion sickness. Then why do I have a rotten fish on my head? I made a bet with Shino that I could get you to smell like a rotten fish, but that's not important now, and remember to aim for the bucket. Before Sasuke could yell at him again, Naruto let go of his arm and he started to spin. As soon as he let go, Naruto darted away and stood behind a tree. Kakashi, seeing what he was doing, asked why. Naruto just grinned at him and pointed to the screaming Sasuke. As he turned, Kakashi was hit in the face with Sasuke's puke. Ah, that's why. When he turned back to the insane blonde, he was rolling on the ground laughing. When Naruto had calmed down and Kakashi had cleaned himself off with a low-level water jutsu, the two turned back to Sasuke. He was very pale and his eyes were unfocused, but as soon as he was back to normal, Naruto did it again before he could speak. This continued for the next 3 hours straight until Sasuke stopped puking and was able to yell at Naruto while he was still spinning. The bucket was full and the surrounding area now had several puddles of sick. Kakashi had learned his lesson the first time and was able to avoid being splattered again. Finally satisfied that Sasuke was used to spinning at high speeds and wouldn't get sick easily, Naruto went and cut him down with a kunai he had gotten from Kakashi. What he forgot to do, however, was move the bucket. As soon as he cut the rope, Sasuke fell face first into the bucket, which caused Naruto to fall on the ground and laugh yet again. When Sasuke got up and couldn't get the bucket of his head, Naruto started having trouble breathing. After a few minutes, Kakashi took pity on his student and pulled the bucket off. The young Uchiha just stared daggers at the blonde rolling around on the ground at his expense. It took a full 10 minutes for Naruto to calm down and he still couldn't help the odd giggle here and there. Right, now that you got used to feeling sick, I think I should explain more about my style. Like I said earlier, it requires you to move at insane speed to build up momentum but makes you sick when you stop, which is why I spun you around for the last 3 hours. It is because of this I named this style the drunken flash step. Okay, now there are 3 ways to counteract this style. One is to move faster than your opponent to build up more momentum. Another is to move at the same speed your opponent, and the last way is to get the person using this style to stop completely. With me so far? When they both nodded, he went on. They had all sat down during the explanation, Kakashi because he knew it would be long and Sasuke because he was still a little shaky on his feet. Now the longer you are able to handle the level of speed I am talking about, the longer you can fight using this style, but if you use it continually for too long, it will take a while for you to get over the dizziness. There are 3 forms to my style. The first is all about attack, the second is all about defense, and the third is about subduing the enemy. Again they nodded. Now the way I used it on the demon brothers was the third form. It is a more advanced form that requires great kenjutsu skill and accuracy to ensure you only break the first layer of skin. I will not be teaching you this form. At this, Sasuke shot to his feet in anger and yelled. What? Why not? It wouldn't suit your style. This calmed Sasuke down instantly. This Naruto he could stand to be around, calculating and serious. If he said this, he would have a valid reason. Nodding his head for the blonde to continue, Sasuke sat back down on the ground to listen. The way you fight is all about power. You use your strength, speed and jutsu to overpower your opponents as quickly as possible. Is that a bad thing? No, actually it is perfect for a ninja. Kill quickly and efficiently, in and out. But I made the third variation as a way to prolong the fight, causing the most amount of pain but not killing them. In essence, it is a capture technique and a torture technique. Sasuke thought about what Naruto said for a moment before nodding his head. I see what you mean, but then what are you going to teach me, the first? Actually, I'm going to teach you a bit of the first and the second. You never know when you will need it, just in case. This time it was Kakashi to nod his head in agreement. He's right. Knowing both will only help you in the long run. You can still focus on one, but even if you only know the basics of the other, it might mean the difference between life and death later on. By the way, I will only teach you the basics and mechanics of the style. This time Sasuke kept his calm. Why? Because if I show you the basics, you can build it up and make it your own. The flash step is a loose style. It's all about quick, flowing movements, and if I show you all the ways I use it, it might not be as effective. This way it will be perfect for you. I said I'd teach you a style, well, I changed my mind, and I'm going to help you make your own. Both Kakashi and Sasuke were a little shocked at his words. He was not only willing to let Sasuke use his style, but was going to take the time to rework it just so it would work better for him. Then he said something that made their thought process come to a complete stop and their eyes to go wide. You know, now that I think about it, this could be the perfect style for you. I mean, when you activate your Sharingan, you can process movement better, right? So in theory you could skip the side effects completely, or at least they would be less of a problem. Both their minds went back into overdrive. He was right. When Sasuke's Sharingan activated, this could be the perfect style. It was a powerful style, and the only thing that would be a problem was the after effects. But something was still bugging Sasuke. Why are you doing this? You created a powerful fighting style and now you're doing all this for me. We don't even know each other. Actually, I don't even like you. So why are you doing this? Naruto thought about that for a moment, and when he came up with a good reply, he answered. Because you asked me to. That's it, because I asked you to. Pretty much, but you're right. We don't know each other that well, and I can tell you don't like me. Not many people do for some reason. But I can tell you are full of pride, and so for you to ask me for help must have been hard for you. And as for why I'm putting in so much effort to help you, well, if you have a strong fighting style, then it looks good on me for helping you create it. This made sense to the Uchiha. By teaching Sasuke this style, Naruto could say he helped make it. Plus, this is a good lesson for you. When you have your Sharingan, you will be tempted, like so many Uchiha before you, to rely on it too much. This way it shows you the benefits of hard work. Sasuke didn't know if he should be grateful for the help or angry that he insulted his family. Fortunately, he didn't have to decide. He's right, Sasuke. Turning to his sensei, Sasuke just stared at him, waiting for an explanation. Take it from someone who's fell into that trap already. I became complacent with my skills and relied on the Sharingan too much. It made me arrogant. Because of this, I made a mistake that I can never take back. Sasuke didn't see Kakashi looking at Naruto out of the corner of his eye when he said this, but Naruto did. The three of them said nothing for a few minutes, lost in their own thoughts. Kakashi of the past, Sasuke on his family, and Naruto wondering if he could pat his head and rub his belly at the same time while balancing a kunai on his nose. When the moment passed, Naruto stood up and looked down at the two. Anyway, like I was saying, I will teach you the basics of the style and let you do the rest yourself. But I think you should do something else for the rest of the day. You still look ill. So I'll leave you with Kakashi and go do my own training. Later. He was gone before Kakashi could say anything. Letting out a deep breath, Kakashi turned back to Sasuke. He was still a bit pale. His hair had sick in it and for some reason he was still wearing the rotten fish. Okay. For the rest of the day we will be doing the tree walking exercise. Why the hell will we be climbing trees? Kakashi sighed at his student's lack of knowledge before he launched into an explanation of the exercise. XXX. They didn't see Naruto until it was time to go back to the house. When the blonde came back into the clearing, it was to a tired Sasuke and Kakashi quickly hiding his book behind his back. When they got to the house, they were the last to arrive. As they came into the sitting room, all eyes turned to them, or more specifically, Sasuke. Without saying a word, Shino walked over to Naruto and gave him some money. Confused by the exchange, Sasuke suddenly remembered what Naruto had said earlier about a bet with Shino. Trying to be inconspicuous, Sasuke made his way over to a window and threw the rotten fish into the lake outside, then turned back and glared at Naruto. XXX. The next day training went more or less the same as the day before, but without the rotten fish, and instead of tying him up, Naruto just had Sasuke spin on his feet in one spot. When he had been doing that for a few hours, Naruto showed Sasuke the basics of the style and how to wield a sword. After another couple of hours of this, Naruto decided that it was time to call it a day and set out to do his own training while Kakashi had Sasuke doing the tree climbing exercise again. At one point, Kakashi had tried to find the blonde to see if he could help him in whatever it was he was training in, but couldn't find him. Giving up, he had gone back to supervise Sasuke as he tried over and over again to make it up the tree without success. It wasn't until just before the sun went down that they saw Naruto again. He didn't even seem tired, but then again he never did. Heading back towards the house, Kakashi tried multiple times to get Naruto to tell him what he was doing and where he had been, but every time the boy would just smile at him without answering. It was a little infuriating on Kakashi's end, but he had no authority over Naruto, and Kurenai seemed to let the boy do what he wanted so long as he showed up again at some point. After dinner, all the ninja met up in the sitting room to discuss what had happened in the day and what they would be doing tomorrow. The bridge was going well, but if Tazuna lost any more workers, they would start to fall behind. Kakashi gave a quick summary of how Sasuke's training was going, but explained how Naruto would go and do his own training and couldn't report on the blonde's progress. When Kurenai didn't say anything, Kakashi guessed that his theory about this happening regularly was correct, and it wasn't just him. At some point while they were talking, Shino and Hinata took out their respective weapons and started to clean them for something to do. When Kakashi and his team took notice of this, they all moved forward to see. They had all heard about the new weapons of the Aburame and Hyuga clans, but not many people had actually seen them. They marveled at the elegant tools of death and how much care had gone into the making. Kiba, seeing his chance to ask about the weapons for his clan, stepped closer with a smug look on his face. His mother had been trying to find out who the craftsman was ever since they had been shown at a council meeting. All she was able to find out was that they were connected to a small ninja shop owned by a man named Higashi. But despite numerous attempts at getting the old fool to talk, he refused to say anything. His mother was desperate, as were the other clans of Konoha, to have their own weapons made by the mysterious weapons maker known only as the Faceless Blacksmith. So these are the new famed weapons of your clans. They don't look like much. Shino's looks like a pipe. What harm could they do? I bet the guy that made them was just a fraud. Both Shino and Hinata raised their eyebrows at the dog-like boy's words and resisted the urge to look at Naruto in the corner of the room. Standing up from his seat, Shino went over to the log pile next to the unlit fireplace, picked up 2 large pieces of oak and made his way into the center of the room. Putting the wood down for a moment, the bug user fixed his wasp point to his arm. Without saying a word, Shino threw one of the oak logs into the air and, with speed Kiba could barely follow, thrust his arm forward. The pipe-like weapon shot out of his sleeve and pierced the log. What shocked the young Inuzuka was that the log started to disintegrate before his eyes. When there was nothing left, they could all see the bugs flying back to Shino from the pile of dust on the floor. Turning to look at Hinata, she gave a small nod and stood, her hands of kami already on. Bending and picking up the other piece of wood, Shino threw it at the waiting girl. All Hinata did was raise her right hand, which had a light blue glow trailing along several of the seals carved into the metal, and tap the wood as it flew towards her, which caused it to explode in a shower of splinters. They turned their attention towards the shocked members of Team 7 and Hinata explained. Both our weapons are designed to increase our clan's fighting styles. Getting over his shock, Kiba got a contemplating look on his face. When he was done thinking, he looked at them both with determination in his eyes. Foregoing being polite, Kiba asked them straight. Who made them? This time it was Shino to answer. We are not at liberty to reveal the identity of the faceless blacksmith. It was a condition made when we received the weapons. Only our clan heads know who he is and are allowed to divulge his identity. At his words, Kiba lost his temper. Slamming his hands on the side of his chair and shooting to his feet, he stormed over to the quiet boy and grabbed him by the collar. Listen here, you freak. It's not right that both your clans get special attention, and it's not fair that you don't tell the other clans who the creator is. You think that you can keep him all to yourselves. We all want a weapon made for us. Now start talking or I'll fucking beat it out of you. I would suggest you release me. As I said, I am not allowed to tell you anything, and it's okay, Shino. Dog piss. If you don't release my friend in the next 3 seconds, I'm going to strangle you with your own intestines. Turning to face the blonde in his rage-filled mind, Kiba barely heard the threat. Shut your fucking mouth, Uzumaki. This has nothing to do with you. Naruto's grin just widened at the dog-like boy, as Akamaru ran away from his partner and hid under a chair. Walking over to Kiba, the blonde, without saying a word, hit him in the face, sending him across the room, the shock snapping him out of his anger. That's where you're wrong, pup. I'm the faceless blacksmith, shit for brains. So I would show some respect. Unless you never want to see weapons for your clan. At his words, all of Team 7 turned shocked expressions towards Shino and Hinata. When they reluctantly nodded their heads, Kiba went very pale and stared at the insane blonde that was grinning down at him and said the only thing that he could think of. Fuck. XXX. Flashback. XXX. After he had given his team their completed custom weapons, Hinata and Shino had gone back to their clans with the new weapon and showed their parents, otherwise known as the current clan heads, the new weapon. XXX. Hinata walked slowly back from Training Ground 8, all the while admiring the craftsmanship and beauty of her new weapons. The seals that littered the surface of the metal just seemed to enhance the elegance of the weapon, making it a piece of art. After Naruto had given her the gauntlets, he had explained to her quickly how to use the weapon. Kurenai had then allowed her to test it against a training dummy. Naruto had told her to channel chakra to the tip of the pointed finger instead of her fingertips. To say the results were shocking would be an understatement. The second the metal tip touched the wood of the training dummy, it exploded in a shower of splinters. But now she was approaching her clan compound and was beginning to get nervous. Hinata wasn't sure how the clan would react to the existence of the weapons, as they prided themselves on having a perfect style that couldn't be improved. But as usual, Naruto had blown that out of the water with his out-of-the-box thinking. Hinata turned the corner and the gate came into view along with the 2 branch members guarding the gate. Hinata walked by them, giving each a nod of acknowledgement before heading into the compound. Once inside, she walked to her father's office, where she stopped outside and knocked gently against the door. Come in. Opening the door, Hinata walked inside and sat down on the pillow opposite her father while he continued to look over papers pertaining to the clan. After a few moments, Hiyashi put down the papers to look at his eldest daughter. What can I do for you, Hinata? You know that I am busy. Yes, father. I am here to show you a new weapon that has been given to me by a member of my team. He claims that it will be able to enhance our gentle fist strikes to actually destroy a person's chakra points. Hiyashi looked at her for a moment before holding out his hand. Let me see these new weapons, please. Yes, father. Hinata quickly took out her gauntlets from her bag and handed them to her father. Hiyashi went over them with a critical eye, noting the high-quality craftsmanship, materials and the complexity of the seals. Hinata waited patiently for her father to finish before he looked at her and put the weapon down on his desk. Have you tested this yet? Yes, father. I have tested it and it greatly enhances the power of a strike. I could show you, but I think that I will need to practice more before I am become completely proficient with it. Alright then, let's go to a training field. I would like to see what this thing and do in person. Hinata nodded and followed her father out of the office to a nearby training ground within the compound. Hinata put on her gauntlets and stood in front of a training post in the opening stance to the gentle fist. Hinata looked at her father, who was standing to the side. Seeing him nod his head, Hinata rushed forward and quickly struck the post several times. Each point of contact exploded outwards, leaving a crater. After the combo, Hinata backed up so her father could see, and she looked at him for his appraisal. Hiyashi was in a word shocked. The weapons that Hinata had seemed to increase the power of a single strike, and whoever made it seemed to know what they were talking about. Hinata, where did you say you got this weapon? A member of my team gave it to me. Would it be possible get more of these for other members of the clan? Father, before I tell you more, first you have to agree with a few conditions. 1. You can't tell anyone where I got this weapon or who was the original creator. The next condition is you can't hound him to make more. Hiyashi thought for a moment before nodding. Good. The person that made this weapon was my teammate Uzumaki Naruto, and he told me that you can order more of these from a little weapons shop known as the Rusty Kunai. Alright then. Before I do anything else, I believe the council has to be alerted to this development, and I think a demonstration to the clan might be in order. XXX. Shino entered his family's home and moved swiftly and efficiently towards his father's study and lab. Coming to the door, Shino knocked twice and waited. Shino heard some movement before the door opened to show Shino's father and the current clan leader, Shibi Aburame. Hello father, I must speak with you about a recent development. Shibi nodded and moved away from the door towards his desk. Taking a seat, he motioned for Shino to sit. Well, tell me of this development. Instead of talking, Shino simply placed his new weapon in front of his father. Shibi picked up the weapon and examined it closely. It seems to be a weapon for close combat use, but what does it have to do with anything? This father was made for me by a rather eccentric friend of mine and claimed that it will help to enhance our fighting style and reduce our weakness with upfront confrontation and fights. My friend said that this will allow us to inject our beetles into enemies, thus allowing them to attack from the inside out. Shibi nodded slowly before speaking once again. Would it be possible to secure more of these weapons? Shino nodded and said, yes, under a few conditions. Those being, you are not allowed to tell anyone who created this weapon, which was my teammate Naruto Uzumaki. You have to purchase more of these from a weapons shop in the village called the Rusty Kunai, as they are the only people able to make the weapons besides Naruto, and you are not allowed to ask Naruto to make them for the clan. These terms are acceptable, and I will make sure to secure and test this new weapon for myself before I continue with introducing it to the clan. Shino simply nodded and took his new weapon from his father. He then got up and left the room, intent on training with his hive. XXX. Things became very interesting after that, as not only did the Hyuga and Aburame find Naruto's weapon useful and impressive, but the weapons had definitely got the attention of the other clans in the village. Word quickly spread among the shinobi and civilians of a mysterious new blacksmith working out of the Higashi's shop, otherwise known as the Rusty Kunai. But things got increasingly interesting when the Hyuga and Aburame clans announced their weapons to the public using an exhibition of their new weapons. The other clans were in attendance along with many civilians. They were shocked at the power the new weapons elevated the users' attacks to, and they became very determined to find the maker and get their own custom weapons. Ninja began flooding the shop asking for custom weapons and buy the weapon on the shelves. Higashi and Tenten had to work almost around the clock to keep up with orders, and Higashi even pulled Naruto in to help when he had time. Higashi also hired a person to handle the front of the store while he worked in the workshop. Business became so good that Higashi bought out the store next to him and expanded the shop so he could have a larger workshop and display area. During this time, Higashi and Tenten were constantly questioned about the faceless blacksmith, as he had come to be known. Something that had amused the three of them greatly because of Naruto always wearing bandages to cover his face. They always answered the same way, telling whoever, including clan heads, that they were not at liberty to say, and that the faceless blacksmith would reveal himself if he chose to. XXX. Flashback end. XXX. The room was deadly quiet, no one knowing what to say. Hiba was still frozen in place, staring at Naruto in shock. Hiba knew that he might have just ruined his family's chance to have weapons made for them. Running up to the blonde, Hiba threw himself at his feet and practically shouted. I'm sorry. I didn't mean anything by it, really. I just wanted to help my clan. Please make us a weapon. Looking down at the groveling boy, Naruto's face went hard. He still had the smile on his face, but it didn't reach his eyes anymore. Get up, dog piss. I said show respect, but this is stupid. Show some pride. For Kami's sake, have some self-respect. You're a future clan head. Don't bow to anyone but the Hokage. As for the weapons, give me some fucking time, will you? Do you know how much effort and time it took to understand the Aburame and Hyuga clan styles to make those weapons? I had to study Hinata and Shino for the better part of a month before I understood some of the nuances to their family's style. I've been studying all the clans of Konoha for months, trying to learn as much as possible so I can make the perfect weapon for each clan. When Kiba heard this, he raised his head to look at Naruto's face in confusion. You mean you were going to make something for my clan the whole time? But then why didn't you just say something to the clans? They have been desperate to find out who the faceless blacksmith is for months. Shrugging his shoulders, Naruto regained his normal grin. It was funny watching them all run around like headless chickens, plus then you guys could pester me to hurry up with the weapons. If you didn't know who the creator was, then you couldn't force them to make something for your clans. This caused all those in the room to sweat drop and see the wisdom in his words. XXX. The next day it was Naruto and Sasuke's turn to guard Tazuna at the bridge. It went without saying that the two boys were impressed with the sheer size of the bridge. At some point in the day, Naruto had taken to helping the workers by moving heavy rocks and equipment that would have needed to be moved with a makeshift crane. Several people had left during the day, saying that they had to think of their families. Tazuna wasn't happy, but he could understand. That night, like every other night, they all fell asleep to the sound of Naruto playing his violin. XXX. The next morning was odd. There was no sign of Naruto for one thing, which was never a good thing. The weather was good, if a bit windy, and they were all in a good mood. Tsunami was in the kitchen preparing breakfast. Inari was sulking in a corner. Shino, Hinata, Hiba and Sakura were talking in the living room, and Kurenai, Kakashi and Tazuna were discussing the progress of the bridge. Then something happened that none of them would ever forget. It was one of those moments that engraves itself into your mind and you're never able to forget it. That moment was when Sasuke Uchiha, one of the most uptight people any of them had ever met, came down the stairs in a yellow sundress, with his hair as curls. The room was filled with stunned silence, no one knew what to say. Then, to everyone's shock yet again, Sasuke walked through the front door with a pile of chopped wood in his arms. Sasuke and the imposter stared at each other for a few minutes, still no one saying a thing. Then the Sasuke holding the wood uttered a single sentence. What the fuck is this shit? The Sasuke in the dress fell to the floor and started laughing at this. Before their eyes, the Sasuke on the floor started to ripple and change. When it was done, there was Naruto, still rolling around on the floor. Ha 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 ha. Why you should have seen your faces. Ha ha. XXX. It had been 2 weeks and the bridge was almost complete. Tazuna said that it would be done in about 3 days. Sasuke's training in Naruto's flash step style was progressing well. He was now actually using the katana and could fight. Not very well yet, but he could fight. Naruto was actually impressed with him. Kakashi was completely healed, and it was decided that for the rest of the mission they would all be guarding Tazuna at the bridge. Hiba had asked what they would do about Tsunami and Inari, but the Jonin had assured them all that if Gato was going to try anything, he would have done it by now. They were currently all sat around the table eating dinner. They were all talking about how their training had been going and planning what to do depending on the situation. Everyone was stressed. Zabuza would be making a move any day now, and the weight was getting to them all. Well, except Naruto, he was as happy as ever. It was then, in the middle of the meal, that Inari stood up and started shouting. Why do you even bother? You're all just going to die anyway. No one can beat Gato. You should just leave. By the end of his outburst, Inari was in tears and his voice had started to waver. They all stopped talking and stared at the young boy. After a moment, Kakashi got up and walked over to him and placed his hands on his shoulders. Look, I understand that it may seem like that, but people like Gato are nothing more than cowards that hide behind their money. He may have a small army of bandits, but compared to a ninja they are all but useless. When he finished talking, Kakashi gave him one of his eye smiles and moved to sit back in his seat, until Inari threw his food at the back of his head. Shut up. What would you know about our pain? In your big fancy village, sheltered from the outside world, you know nothing of suffering. The room went deadly quiet, all the genin turned to the enraged Sasuke. But before anyone could say anything to prevent the young Uchiha from leaping at Inari, Naruto started laughing. It wasn't his normal, slightly insane yet pleasant laugh. It was a full-blown batshit crazy, call the people in white suits with the big needle kind of laugh. Without saying a word, Naruto stood up and turned towards Inari. Kakashi, worried that he might lash out at the boy, moved to stand between them. But Naruto didn't move from his spot. Instead, he slowly reached up to his head and started to unravel his bandages. When he was done, there was a long trail of white bandages going from his neckline and piling onto the floor. The ninja all stared at Naruto's face in horror, except Kakashi, who got a sad look on his face, and Sakura, who ran to the kitchen sink to throw up. Tazuna stared wide-eyed at the blonde and took a long drag from a bottle of sake he had hidden under the table, while Inari lost all color from his face. Tsunami didn't know what to think. At first she had stared in horror like the others, but that soon changed into a look of sadness. Naruto's face was nothing but one big scar, almost like it had been melted off, and what was left of his skin was a bright red and white mess. You could see his teeth and gums through the two holes that used to be his cheeks, and most of his nose was gone. He said nothing, just stared at Inari with what now became a horrifyingly disfigured grin without the bandages to cover his face. Then something else occurred to the middle-aged woman, something that brought tears to her eyes. When she had taken his clothes to clean them, she had seen that he had his whole body covered in bandages. Satisfied that they had seen enough, Naruto started to re-wrap his bandages. When that was done, the blonde turned to them, grin still in place. Sakura had come back, but still looked pale. On my 6th birthday, a mob came to my house. They dragged me outside, tied me up with wire, and beat me for I don't know how long. I was stabbed, strangled, and beaten. I had my throat cut, my stomach slit, and my eyes ripped out of my head. But do you want to know the best part of all of that? You want to know what the best part was? I never lost consciousness, and I healed almost as fast as they hurt me. Then, to finish everything off, once the civilians were getting tired of beating me, I was tied to a log in the middle of the street where they had built a bonfire. Here his grin stretched wider as he watched their eyes widen in understanding. Letting out a dark chuckle, Naruto continued. Yep, that's right. After a nice little speech by the leader of the mob, 5 ninja with their faces covered lit the wood on fire around me. But yet again, that wasn't the best part. You see, it turns out that my advanced healing factor works at the same speed as a human body takes to burn. I was burning for 3 hours straight before the Hokage came and put the fire out and finally freed me from the pain. Naruto then turned to Tsunami and laughed. The most painful thing I have ever experienced. But don't just take my word for it. If you want more information, you could always ask Kakashi. After all, you were there. As he said this, he turned to the masked man, whose eyes widened in shock before they became filled with sadness and regret. So you knew I was guarding you that night? At his words, everyone but Naruto gasped and stared at the one-eyed Jonin in shock. Of course. Letting out a sign, the Cyclops Jonin locked his eye with Naruto's deep blue eyes. That day was one of my biggest regrets. I got sloppy. Let someone get the jump on me. By the time I came to, it was too late. I'm sorry. More so than you can ever imagine. At the end of his explanation, Kakashi averted his eye to look at the floor. If I blamed you for what happened, I would have killed you the first moment I saw you. Shocked at his words, Kakashi turned to look at the boy, only to find him walking towards the door. Where are you going? He didn't get an answer until the blonde got to the door, stopped and turned to look over his shoulder at them all. To release some stress. Oh, and sad sack, if you don't get your act together, I'm going to tie you upside down to a tree and show you how I started Duck Ass's training. If it was possible, Inari would have gone even paler, but instead he just went and hid behind his mum. Grinning to himself, Naruto turned to go, but stopped again and turned to face Sakura. You once asked me why your dad asked for my forgiveness. Your mother was the leader of the mob. Actually, she was the leader of almost every mob that attacked me. The young Pinket's eyes went wide at his words and she ran back to the sink to be sick again. But when they all turned back to Naruto, he was gone. Turning back to Sakura, Kurenai went over to comfort the girl as she cried on the floor. Trying to help the girl pick up the shattered image of her mother. XXX. Naruto was running through the forest to try and calm himself down. The boy had gotten to him. He knew that. The problem was that he could feel how close he had come to losing himself. He needed to get out, get away from people. As he ran, he could see the shadows of the creatures that ran with him. They were the only living things that stayed in the area as he ran. All the other animals had run away when they felt his presence, his killing intent, his rage. They made no noise and stayed in the darker parts of the trees, away from the moonlight. Every now and then he could see breath flashes of black fur, or yellow eyes. He finally came to a stop in a fairly large clearing. It was then he noticed the moon was full and there were no clouds in the sky. Turning back to the tree line, his throat and head rippled for a moment, leaving his face looking even wilder, almost wolf-like. Merry moon night, my brothers. Without making any noise, 7 of the biggest wolves stepped out of the shadows. They all stood at the blonde's shoulder in height when they were on all fours and had black fur, their well-muscled legs showing that they were built for speed and power. The only exception to this was a slightly thinner and smaller wolf that had a pure white stripe running down his back from the top of its head to the tip of its longer than normal tail. It was this wolf that stepped forward. Merry moon night, pup. What makes you run so? I needed to run. The wolf just nodded its head and turned away. Will you hunt with us tonight? Not tonight, brothers. My head is not right. It would not be good for me to hunt with you. I understand. May the moon smile at you. May the moon smile at you as well. Without saying another word, the wolves all turned and ran back into the shadows and Naruto let his face return to normal. For the next hour Naruto just stared at the moon. Every now and then he would hear the cry of the wolves in the distance, closing his eyes for a moment before opening them and started screaming at the moon, which morphed into a terrifying roar. XXX. The next morning found a young girl walking through the forest with a wicker basket under her arm. She had a pretty face and long black hair. She was wearing a pink yukata that hid most of her figure and her soft brown eyes were scanning the ground around her as she walked. Then she heard it. At first she needed to strain her ears, but as she quickened her pace it got clearer and clearer. The most beautiful, yet mournful music she had ever heard. She could feel it in her heart, the pain and the sadness that reflected in those notes. Haku soon found herself running in the direction of the music, desperate to find the source of the sound. But slowed to a walk when she came to what used to be a part of the woods. Some of the trees looked like they had been pulled out of the ground, while others had claw marks. She had never seen anything like this, but the music was still calling to her. So, getting over her shock, she made her way through the wreckage. A few minutes later Haku came to what looked like a natural clearing and stopped in her tracks. There, sat in the middle of the clearing playing a violin, was the blonde boy Zabuza had been talking about. Not knowing what else to do, she made her way to the center of the clearing and sat next to the boy. He didn't stop playing, didn't even show any sign that he knew she was there. But Haku knew he did. So she just sat there, listening. Eventually the music came to an end and, with slow movements, the strange boy put the violin away, though she didn't see where he put it, and turned to her with the same grin on his face she had seen the day they met. You play beautifully. You're a bit out of the way, for a civilian, so what brings you out here? Thinking quickly, Haku decided to tell a half-truth. I'm looking for medicinal herbs for my friend, he was hurt and I have been taking care of him. Nodding his head Naruto stood up and looked down at her. I think I saw something that might help you. Getting up, Haku was surprised when the blonde started to walk on his hands, then do flips, then back to walking on his hands. She couldn't help the giggle that came from her throat. What are you doing? Looking at her from his upside down position, Naruto looked at her, confused. Handstand. Giggling again, Haku elaborated. I can see that, but why are you doing a handstand? Why not? When he said this, his grin spread wider over his face. They didn't say anything for the next few minutes until they came to another, smaller clearing filled with different flowers. Walking over to a patch of small purple flowers, Haku turned to look at Naruto over her shoulder. My name is Haku, what's yours? Naruto. That's a nice name. Turning back to the flowers, Haku started picking the leaves off. Tell me, Naruto-san, are you a ninja? Yes. Do you have a precious person back at your village? Seeing that he didn't understand, Haku explained. I believe that for a person to be truly strong, they need someone to fight for, to bring out their inner strength. Do you have someone like that? Naruto laughed at this, taking a full 5 minutes to calm down before he could answer. I have no one. I have no true purpose. There is no one in that place that I would truly fight for. I would just as soon kill them as I would save them. Shaking her head sadly, Haku went back to picking the leaves. I see, that's sad to hear. You must be very lonely. Nothing was said for a while after that. Haku would move to different patches of flowers from time to time, taking different parts, until Naruto broke the silence. This friend of yours, is he your precious person? Smiling to herself, Haku turned back to the blonde. Yes, he is very special to me. Nodding his head, Naruto's grin stretched back over his face. Your friend is lucky to have such a beautiful girl such as yourself taking care of him. He couldn't help but laugh as Haku's face turned red and she started stuttering. It took several minutes for her to calm down, but even then she still had a light blush. They talked for another hour before Haku left to get back to her friend and Naruto to guard Tazuna. I hope to meet you again, Naruto-san. I'm sure we will. Turning her back to the boy, Haku missed the mischievous look that came to Naruto's face. I'm sure we will. XXX. Naruto went straight to the bridge to meet up with the others, knowing that they would have already left for the day. When he got there, he went straight to Tazuna and asked what he could do to help. He didn't miss the looks he was getting from the others. Or that the old bridge builder couldn't meet his eyes. So, in true Naruto style, he walked up to Kiba and hit him in the face with a fish, then turned away to start working. No one knew where he got the fish, or why he hit Kiba with it. Getting up off the floor, face red with rage, Kiba got right up in the blonde's face. What the hell? What? Why did you hit me with a fish, you fucking head case? The innocent look on Naruto's face didn't fool anyone. I don't know what you're talking about. I don't even have a fish. That was when they realized he was right, the fish was gone. Screaming, Kiba lunged at Naruto in an attempt to claw what was left of his face off. Faster than any of the other genin could see, Naruto grab the dog-like boy's arms, stopping him in his tracks, much to the shock of Kiba, and pulled him into a bear hug. Kiba was so shocked that he didn't even notice that Naruto had walked over to the edge of the bridge and dropped the young Inuzuka into the water below. Clapping his hands together and smiling as Kiba shouted curse after curse at the blonde, he turned to the others on the bridge and shrugged. I kept telling him that he smelt of dog piss, now he smells of wet dog instead. Shaking their heads, everyone got back to work. It wasn't until an hour later that anyone thought to help Kiba out of the water. XXX. The next day when the two teams set off for the bridge, there was no sign of Naruto, so they just went ahead. Tsunami was going around the house cleaning when she heard someone at the door. Putting down the duster in her hands, she made her way to the door, only to have it broken down just before she made it. Stood in the doorway were two men with swords. One of them, the smaller of the two, had on a purple hat and a cocky smirk, while the other had no shirt and had multiple scars over his body. Stepping forward, the smaller of the two drew his sword and pointed it at her, the smirk never leaving his face. Gato would like to have a few words with you. Backing away from the two men, Tsunami made to run out the back door but wasn't quick enough. Grabbing her by the arms, the two men dragged her outside, kicking and screaming. Hearing his mother in trouble, Inari came out the house with a knife. Let go of my mom. The two men looked at each other for a moment, then the man with the hat stepped forward, sword in hand. Tsunami was screaming for the boy to go back inside, but he just kept running straight towards the man. What happened next was so fast that she almost missed it. Just as the sword was about to cut Inari's head from his shoulders, a shadow came running out of the wood, shortly followed by 6 more. Before they knew what happened, the man in a hat was rolling around on the ground screaming as he clutched the blooded stump that had once been his arm. It was then that Tsunami heard a low growl behind her. Slowly turning around, Tsunami came face to face with the biggest wolf she had ever seen, and its maw was covered in blood. The thug holding her arm backed away as quickly as he could and raised his sword in a poor attempt to defend himself, never seeing the other wolf that was running at him from behind. The wolf was on him instantly, jumping on the thug's back and biting into the back of his neck, and with one quick shake the man went limp, his spine broken. The thug with the hat was soon dealt with in a similar way, and the area was filled with nothing but silence. Tsunami ran to her son and pulled him into a hug while shielding him from the wild animals at the same time. Then Inari said something that made her eyes widen in realization. Naruto was right. That's right. Naruto had said that he met a pack of wolves and that as long as they gave them scraps of meat they would help them. She couldn't help the laughter that escaped her throat as she cried into Inari's hair, thanking the blonde in her head over and over again. XXX. The first clue that something was wrong was that the closer they got to the bridge, the thicker the fog became. The second was that when they got to the bridge, there was a pile of unconscious workers. Reacting quickly, they all moved into formation around Tazuna, weapons drawn at the ready. Sasuke took out his twin short katana and getting into a low crouch with his feet spread apart, ready to start his rotation. Hinata checked the straps on her gauntlets while Shino kept his hidden in his sleeve in case of a surprise attack and at the same time sending out his bugs to assess the area. Kurenai took out one of her kunai, having learned in their first encounter with the demon of the mist that her sharpshooter was not as effective without her genjutsu to support it. Kakashi and Sakura both took a kunai in each hand while Kiba got into his clan's stance with Akamaru. They stayed like this for several minutes, waiting for Zabuza to make his move, the mist swirling around them as they stood as still as statues. Just when the tension was getting too much for them to take, they saw 2 shadows appear in the mist, calmly walking towards them. The closer they got, the clearer they became, until finally they were both fully visible, revealing them to be Zabuza and the hunter ninja from before, standing together and confirming their suspicions. The two opposing forces stared at each other for a moment, sizing each other up, until Zabuza stepped forward and locked eyes with Kakashi. This can all end now if you just hand over the old man. The way in which he said this showing that he clearly didn't expect them to comply. It could also end now if you both leave. No one moved throughout the short exchange of words, and they stayed like that for some time. Shaking his head, the demon of the mist turned towards the young hunter nin standing next to him and gave him orders. The blonde's not here, so pick another brat to entertain yourself with while I fight Kakashi. I understand. The reply that came surprised the Konoha ninja, not the reply itself, but the fact that it was clearly female, and without another word they both vanished into the mist. Sasuke, getting impatient with the games, ran after them in the direction that he had seen both ninja disappear in an attempt to catch them before they could get too far, blocking out the shouts that followed him as he ran, but he was too slow. He heard the sounds of battle behind him, but before he could run back to help the others, a Senbon needle found itself embedded into the lower part of his right leg. Gritting his teeth in pain, he pulled out the needle and turned around in an attempt to find the one that had thrown it. But before he could find them, another needle shot into his left forearm, then another into his right. Realizing that he was a sitting duck when he stood still, Sasuke started to pour chakra into the air. It wasn't easy. The needles didn't stop and it took him a full minute to build up enough chakra to start countering. One of the first things Naruto had taught him when he had gotten used to being ninja was how to block. It wasn't like most styles, where each time you block a strike you come to a brief standstill. This kind of blocking required you to just skin the opponent's weapon in order to redirect where it would hit. The blonde had taught him this by throwing rocks at him until he could block. For several minutes Sasuke continued to flash from point to point and block most of the Senbon that were being aimed at him. Then it stopped. Just in time because the young Uchiha couldn't keep up this level of chakra output for much longer without stopping, and the Hunter Nin came into view. Impressive. I see you have not been idle in the last few weeks. But it will not save you. You are not strong enough to defeat me at your current level. If you surrender now I will spare you. The calm tone in which the Hunter Nin said this infuriated Sasuke. It was the same tone he used. Sasuke didn't notice that his eyes had flashed red in the moments after what the Hunter Ninja had said, but Haku did. Taking that as her answer, she shook her head sadly and lifted her hands to perform hand seals. The speed in which the Hunter Nin performed seals was enough to make Sasuke worried. He could barely see them. But what truly scared him was when the water on the bridge started to rise and formed into a dome of perfect mirrors made out of ice. Her jutsu complete, Haku stepped back into one of the mirrors and disappeared. Slowly walking up to the closest one to him, Sasuke reached out his hand to examine one, only to jump back into the middle in surprise when an image of the Hunter Nin appeared in the mirror. As quick as he could, the raven-haired boy rushed through hand seals and shot out a good-sized fireball at the mirror in front of him. Then his eyes widened in shock when the smoke cleared. There wasn't a scratch on the mirror. Slowly the image of the Hunter Ninja appeared in all the mirrors and Sasuke was getting a very bad feeling. These mirrors are a product of my bloodline. I call it demonic ice mirrors. No one has ever escaped. You will be no different. Before he could reply, Sasuke found himself yet again being peppered with Senbon. He tried his best to block them, but they were faster than the last time and he couldn't get out of the way to block. When they finally stopped, Sasuke slumped to the ground, his legs no longer able to support him. His body was full of needles, hardly any flesh left unscathed. Then he heard something that made him think that he had lost too much blood. In the distance, but getting closer every moment, was a low whistling. He didn't recognize the tune, but there was no mistaking that it was getting closer. Then out of the mist someone that made Sasuke both happy and caused him to slap himself in the face at the same time. Of all the people that could have come to his rescue, why did it have to be him there? Stood in all his glory with his usual manic grin on his face, was Naruto. Hey duck ass, you look like shit. Why did you let her hit you with so many pointy things, or are you just into that shit? Gritting his teeth, Sasuke practically yelled. Shut the fuck up. Just help me already. The blonde brought his index finger to his lips and made a thinking face, then walked up to the still injured Sasuke. Okay. Hitting him in the back of the neck, forcing the boy to fall face first on the ground. Picking up the limp boy with one hand by the back of his collar, Naruto then proceeded to throw the boy in the direction of the other people from Konoha, hearing a scream when the boy landed near them. Nodding to himself, the still grinning blonde turned back to the Hunter Ninja that had come out of the mirror to watch the exchange. That was a very brave thing you did, getting your friend out of harm's way. I told you already, Haku-chan, they mean nothing to me, and I just needed him out of the way. Now, are you going to take off that mask so I can see your pretty face or not? Haku froze when the blonde used her name, but reached up and removed the mask nonetheless. How did you know? Naruto's grin stretched even bigger. You smell of wildflowers and herbs. I knew you weren't a Hunter Nin the first time we met. They always smell of blood. Haku just nodded her head in satisfaction at his answer. So what now? I don't want to fight you, but I will for Zabuza. Again the blonde's grin stretched even bigger across his face. We don't need to fight, we're about to be on the same side. Seeing her confused face, Naruto laughed. Did you really think someone like Gato would pay you? He's leading a small army here now to kill us all after we tire ourselves out fighting each other. Haku's eyes widened at the boy's words. She did have her suspicions about the man, but Zabuza needed the money for his dream, so she had kept her mouth shut. Before anything else could be said between the two, the mist suddenly vanished, causing Haku to gasp. Turning to where they could hear the fight between Kakashi and Zabuza, the two were greeted with the sight of a badly hurt Kakashi running at an equally hurt Zabuza, who was being held in place by a pack of dogs, with a lightning-charged fist. Without thinking, Haku crossed the distance and was stood in front of Zabuza, shielding him from the lethal blow, and closed her eyes waiting for the pain. It never came. When nothing happened, Haku opened her eyes and gasped at the sight before her. Naruto had followed her, but instead of getting in the way like she had, he grabbed Kakashi's arm, stopping it inches from her chest. The lightning was all around him and he must have been in great pain, but he didn't let go. He just stood there, holding the shocked Kakashi's arm and grinning at her. When the jutsu finally ran its course, the still stunned Kakashi stepped back and stared at Naruto in shock, who then let out a loud burp, along with a large amount of smoke, and laughed. "That's a spicy meatball. If it was anyone else they would have been worried." As Haku gently lowered Zabuza to the ground, Kakashi turned to Naruto. "I hope you have a very good reason for this, Naruto. Gato and an army of thugs are on their way to kill us all after we tire ourselves fighting each other, including Nobrow and Haku-chan. They are no longer our enemies." All but Haku was shocked at his words. "Are you sure?" "Yep. Saw them with my own eyes. They're either drunk or retarded because they were talking about how it would be so easy to kill us." It was at this point that Zabuza started to use every swear word ever used. "That fucking little shit stain. When I get my hands on him, I'm going to cut his balls off and make him eat them. How dare that midget double cross me?" Looking at the still downed Zabuza, the blonde boy bent over his head and locked eyes. "I just told you how. He's bringing an army. You should really learn to listen." If he wasn't injured, Zabuza would have strangled the blonde. But before anything else could be said, Sakura let out an ear-splitting scream. Turning to see what she was screaming about, they were all shocked. Standing next to Zabuza was Haku, with an arrow sticking out of her back between her shoulder blades. Catching her as she fell to the ground, Naruto set her down on her front so as not to make it worse. She was very pale, almost completely white, and had started to shake. They all looked in the direction that the arrow had come from to find a short man with gray hair and sunglasses, stood in front of a small army of thugs. He was wearing what looked like a very expensive suit and the smuggest look on his face any of them had ever seen. He turned to address the man stood next to him with a bow in hand. "You missed. I told you to hit the blonde." Stepping forward a few more feet, but not leaving the safety of his thugs, Gato turned back to face them, or more specifically, Zabuza. "I knew you couldn't do it, some demon you turned out to be." Turning his attention to Naruto, he grinned. "So you're the little pest that has been causing so much trouble. You killed my men and let those women go free." It was then that the short man made the biggest mistake of his life. "But no matter. I'll just take these 3 lovely women as compensation. I'm sure my men would enjoy a celebration after this is all over." The cheers from the men were short-lived. The air suddenly grew thicker and was getting harder and harder to breathe. The Konoha ninja backed away from Naruto as his killing intent became visible as a dark aura surrounded him. His head was lowered so his hair was shadowing his eyes, and the grin on his face looked so wide it must have been painful. Zabuza was as shocked as everyone else at first, but then he let out a chuckle, and then that chuckle turned into full-blown laughter. "You did it now." His voice shaking in fear, Gato turned his attention to Zabuza. What the hell are you talking about? You wanted to see a true demon, well you got it." As Zabuza said this, Naruto threw his head towards the sky and let loose a roar. There was nothing human about this roar. It was too deep, too guttural. No human could make a sound like the one Naruto was making. It sent shivers down their spines, and several of Gato's thugs turned and ran at the mere sound of it. His eyes seemed to glow with an eerie blue light and his pupils had become fin slits. Then, still roaring, he put his hands together into a cross-shaped hand seal, and with a large burst of smoke the bridge was filled with Narutos. There were too many to even attempt to count, and one by one they joined their voices together with the original and roared. As quickly as it had started, all the creatures stopped as once, leaving the bridge in complete silence. No one moved, no one breathed. The words that left Naruto's mouth scared them all. "Parade of 1,000 demons." He said it in no more than a whisper, but they all heard him as clearly as if he had yelled it. Without another word, the clones of Naruto all started to ripple. They became creatures of all shapes and sizes, big, small, fat and skinny. Some didn't even seem to have mouths. The rag doll was there, giggling. There were half animal and half humans as well. Things like tigers and wolves, and for some reason a small rabbit with sharp teeth and glowing red eyes. There was a huge, gray-skinned, mammoth of a man that stood at over 15 feet. Its entire body rippling with so much muscle it had trouble moving. A pink, human-shaped thing, it walked on its hands and feet but had no features. No face or definition to its body at all, almost like a blob in a human shape. There were creatures flying in the sky above their heads, some with scales and some with feathers, some that even had both. They were everywhere. No matter where you looked, there was something looking back at you with hungry eyes. And they were all giggling and laughing, as if there was a joke that only they could hear. At the front of them all, like a general stood at the forefront of his army, was something that made all that looked at him shrink away in fear. It was a young boy, no older than 6, with bright blonde hair and the bluest eyes any of them had ever seen. On each of his cheeks were 3 black whisker marks. He was wearing a tattered white t-shirt and a pair of equally tattered black shorts. He was the only one that wasn't laughing, he wasn't even giggling. He just stood there, staring at them with eyes that were too old for a boy. More and more of Gato's men were losing it, but were too afraid of the monsters to run. Then, as if they heard an unspoken command, they all fell silent. No more giggling, no more insane laughter. Just absolute silence. Ring around the roses. A pocket full of posies. Ashes, ashes, you all fall down. His voice was as soft as the chiming of bells, pure, innocent. Yet at the same time just as demonic as of the monsters that surrounded them, and at the word down, hell was unleashed. It was like a dam broke. In one big surge the horde descended onto the thugs with the force of a tidal wave. Those that could fly swooped down and plucked the screaming men and carried them high into the air before dropping them back into the slaughter below. The red-eyed rabbit was sprinting from person to person, ripping the throat out of any it could get its teeth into. The gray-skinned Hulk was tearing men apart with his huge hands, roaring like a wild animal as the blood fell on it like rain. The pink blob was making quick work of anything that touched it, absorbing them into its body and getting fatter and fatter with each new person that it ate. Limbs were flying everywhere and blood was falling like a heavy rain. At the center of it all was the small boy, walking in a straight line towards Gato, who had been untouched by the creatures that had massacred his men like they were nothing. By the time the boy stood in front of him, they were all dead. All that was left was a few body parts and blood, so much blood. Kneeling before the boy, Gato begged, pleaded for his life. I can give you anything, money, power, women, anything you want. The boy cocked his head to the side, as if thinking about the offer. Anything. Seeing his chance, Gato stood up and moved closer to the boy. Anything. The boy slowly lifted his hands and put them on the frantic man's head, then leaned in closer so that only Gato could hear. I want your head. All Gato could do was widen his eyes in horror before the boy gave a sharp pull and his head was pulled from his shoulders, and as the body fell to its knees a fountain of blood erupted from the neck, spraying the boy and ground surrounding him. The monsters all disappeared in a burst of smoke, leaving the boy standing alone in the middle of what was left of Gato's army. Turning, with the head of Gato still in his hands, the boy faced the shocked faces of the Konoha nins and the villagers of Wave, who had shown up sometime during the bloodbath. As he walked toward them, his body started to grow, until the original Naruto stood before them, still covered in blood. He stopped a few feet away and tossed the head at the feet of the villagers. Some people need to die. I regret nothing. With those words his eyes went blank and he fell, landing between Zabuza and Haku. XXX. They all just stared at the young blonde boy that lay on the floor in front of them. All had pale faces and some of them had been sick, but the shock didn't last long. Walking forward towards the decapitated head of their tormentor, Inari bent down and picked it up with trembling hands. All watching thought he was about to be sick like so many others, but were surprised when instead he turned to the crowd, kicked the head in the air, over the side of the bridge and into the water below. All the while yelled in joy. Soon others joined in and before they knew it they were all cheering and hugging each other. While they celebrated, the Konoha ninja moved to look at the downed Naruto. He was breathing, and if they didn't know better they would have thought he was asleep. Haku was still alive, but hurt. From what they could see, the arrow had missed her heart. Kurenai had applied a basic healing jutsu that she had learnt to help stop the bleeding until they could get her properly treated. Zabuza had sat up to watch the slaughter, and they could see he was grinning through his bandages. To think, for years I thought I was a demon, this kid is something else. Walking over to sit next to the missing ninja, Kakashi looked at the still cheering crowd. So what are you going to do now? You can't keep running, especially since the girl is hurt. What choice do I have? I can't go back to my village until that monster is dead, and no other village would have someone like me. I'm wanted for trying to kill my kage. Something Zabuza said got the silver-haired Jonin's attention. What do you mean by that monster? The Misukage went crazy and started killing whole families because they had bloodlines. My country is in the middle of a civil war. I was working as a missing nin to help the resistance. I've been giving them all the money I earned. This surprised Kakashi. Zabuza, the demon of the mist, was trying to help people. Seeing the surprise on the man's face made Zabuza laugh. Look beneath the underneath, isn't that one of Konoha's favorite sayings? True, but for someone who killed an entire class of academy students, it seems odd that you would want to help anyone. And for someone that spends all their time reading porn, you haven't been staring at any of the bouncing tits only a few meters from your face. When he said this, Zabuza motioned towards the crowd of villagers. How did you? Your reputation precedes you. They both laughed at that. Sighing to himself, Zabuza turned to look at Haku on the ground, being tended to by Kurenai. I did it to prove a point. Seeing the questioning look he was given, Zabuza continued. Do you know what happened after I killed them all? They stopped using the traditions of the bloody mist. By killing those few, I saved hundreds. Kakashi had never thought about that. It was true that after the incident with the young Zabuza they had changed the final exam. You could come back with us. Both men jumped in surprise at the voice and turned to see Naruto sitting up and staring at them, grin and all. When the hell did you wake up? Who said I was asleep? I really want to kill you. Join the club. I hear they serve dango and red bean soup on Tuesdays. As the two continued to banter, Kakashi decided to stop them before they destroyed anything. Naruto, what did you mean before? Stopping mid-insult, Naruto turned to the masked Jonin and laughed. Section 42. Paragraph 9 of the Dealing with Missing Ninja Laws of Konoha state that in the case of a country in civil war, a missing nin may seek refuge in Konoha and work out of the village until such a time as the war has been decided. He can come to Konoha and still be a ninja of Kiri. Both men stared at the blonde in shock. Looking the boy up and down, Kakashi finally asks. Where did you learn something like that? I read the Konoha library. You mean in the library? No, I mean I read the entire library. Without another word, the blonde got to his feet and walked towards what was left of the thugs. The people seeing him stopped cheering to watch what he was doing. Moving through the remains, Naruto would stop and pick up a head or an arm and throw it into a pile. No one questioned him on this, just waiting to see what he would do. When he was done, there were two piles on the bridge, one that was made up of the heads of the deceased thugs and the other of everything else. Satisfied that he was done, Naruto turned to the forest and howled, no one seeing his face changing as he did. Within moments they heard a reply and turned just in time to see the 7 wolves walking out of the tree line and towards the grinning boy. The smaller of the wolves with the white stripe stepped forward and the two seemed to communicate. All any of them heard was growls. Seeming to be finished with his talk, Naruto turned towards the villages, face back to normal. As he addressed them, the wolves moved towards the pile of random body parts and started eating. Give them a rabbit a week each and they agree to stay and look after you. None of them knew what to say, it seemed too good to be true. They quickly agreed and Naruto passed on the message. Stepping forward, Tazuna asks, what are you going to do with the heads? Naruto's grin became sinister as he turned back to the other pile. Send a message to the world. XXX. For the next few hours Naruto walked around the village and placed each head on a stick. He did this until he ran out of heads and had surrounded the entire village. No one complained, and after a quick explanation from Kakashi they were actually glad. It turned out that Naruto was performing an old ninja tradition. From what the masked man explained, Naruto was claiming the village as under his protection, meaning that if anything happened he was legally allowed to intervene. The reason he was placing the heads around the village was as a show of strength, showing others what would happen to them if they attacked. All that was left was for Naruto to make a signature and put it in the village. He did this by painting a smiley face on the village hall in red paint. The thing that made it stand out was that the smile was a grin that stretched across the whole face, and instead of normal teeth it had fangs. The idea was that as he became better known throughout the ninja world, the safer they would be, and with the wolves moving into the area permanently, they were sure that someone like Gato would never come into power in their village again. Zabuza had thought a lot about what Naruto had said and agreed to come back to Konoha with them, mostly because Haku still needed medical care that he couldn't provide himself. She would be stable enough to move, but they would have to be careful. Sasuke had regained consciousness and was less than happy with Naruto, but was more than happy when he found out that his Sharingan had activated. For the rest of the mission he could be seen activating and deactivating it to get used to how it felt. The other genin and Kurenai had been helping clean up the bridge and finish its construction, which had been speeded up by the workers Tazuna had lost coming back now that they didn't have to worry about Gato. When it was finished, Tazuna had announced that it would be named the Bridge of Heroes, and a plaque was made with the names of all the people Gato had killed, including Kaiza. The day after Gato's death, the villagers raided Gato's buildings and took anything of value. Expensive works of art, sake, anything that could be used was taken, and the buildings themselves had been set up as temporary homes for those that had been living on the streets. The night before they were set to leave for Konoha, there was a huge celebration. The village was covered in decorations, from hanging lanterns to balloons of every color. The air was filled with the sound of music and the streets were full of people. It seemed like the very air they breathed was full of joy and happiness and was spreading it around like a disease. It was also on this night that they all learned a very important lesson: never let Naruto drink. They thought he was bad normally, but that was before they saw him drunk. It took a lot to get him drunk. He had drank about 3 tankers full of sake before he started acting strange, and by then it was too late. Kakashi and Zabuza had gotten the beating of their lives the next day for encouraging the blonde to drink so much. Unlike most people, when they get drunk he didn't get dizzy, he didn't slur his words, and he was as aware of his surroundings as he was when sober. He did, however, seem to lose any sense of limitations he had, which until that night they didn't know he even did have. In one night he had painted the entire village bright orange, stole the clothes of every man in the village and replaced them with pink tutus, each with a small message on the back. Things like, "My other body is a temple," or, "Takes 5 to party." He dyed everyone's hair purple and used some type of permanent paint to paint all their faces like clowns. He had also super glued a rubber duck to Sasuke's head. When they found him, he was upside down in a tree hanging with a rope tied to his ankles, the only thing stopping them from seeing him naked the bandages he wore to cover his skin. They had needed to stay an extra day just to get the village back to some semblance of normality. When they did leave, the whole village had gathered at the bridge to see them off, Tazuna, Tsunami and Inari at the front of the crowd. Both mother and son had tears rolling down their faces as they said their goodbyes. The only thing that stopped it from being a completely heartwarming moment was that they had found out that Naruto had burned all the clothes he had stolen, meaning that all the men were wearing pink tutus. And they all still had the paint on their faces. Throughout the whole exchange Naruto had never stopped giggling. Just before they set out they all heard the howls of the wolves in the distance. They didn't see them, but they could all tell they were close. Stopping his giggling, they all watched as Naruto's face took on a more bestial appearance and answered the howls with one of his own. After that they all set out towards Konoha. XXX. It took a lot less time getting back to Konoha than it did getting to Wave. Without having to pace themselves for Tazuna's sake, they could move at much faster speeds. They still needed to pace themselves because of Haku, but it was still faster. Kakashi had sent a message ahead with one of his nin dogs, Pakun, a small pug-like dog with a Konoha headband tied around his head and a blue vest. The first time they had heard him talk in his deep tone, Naruto had picked him up and started turning him over in his hands. When the small dog had asked him what he was doing, the blonde's answer was that he was looking for where the batteries went. This had sparked a small argument between the two as to whether Pakun was a real dog or a toy. When that was finally over, Kakashi had given him a scroll to deliver to the Hokage, explaining about Zabuza and Haku so they wouldn't be killed on sight. It took them 2 days to get back, and as soon as they were in sight of the village, a full Anbu patrol surrounded them. One of them took Haku and disappeared in a shunshin while the rest stayed to escort them through the village. They received many strange looks as they were led to the Hokage tower, some people going as far as to point at them and laugh. The reason for this was that the paint Naruto had used still hadn't washed off, and Kakashi, Sasuke, Kiba and Zabuza were all wearing pink tutus. Lucky for Shino, he had been able to hide one set of his ninja clothes from the drunken Naruto. The message on each of their backs seemed to inspire many a laugh from the people that watched them as they passed. Kakashi's was pervert and proud. Sasuke's said, I like ducks, with an arrow pointing up at his head. Kiba had just got neutered. And Zabuza's was, has anyone seen my eyebrows? By the time they got to the relative safety of the tower, they were all glaring at Naruto, who was close to rolling around on the ground in laughter. They were both surprised and mortified when, instead of being led to the Hokage's office, they were taken to the council meeting room. The entire Shinobi Council was present. As they walked into the room, they were met with stunned silence, but it didn't last long. As soon as she saw her son and the words on his back, Sume Inuzuka burst out into laughter. When they had calmed her down, the meeting started. They explained everything that had happened on the mission, except the reason for their current state, and ended with Zabuza formally asking for asylum in Konoha for himself and Haku. When they had finished, Sarutobi stood up and addressed them. First of all, on behalf of all of us, I would like to congratulate you all on a successful mission, which due to unforeseen circumstances has been upgraded to A rank. Second, we as a council accept both you, Zabuza, and your young charge into our village. Provided you agree to a 6-month probation, you will be monitored 24/7 and will not be allowed out of the village during that time. Is that acceptable? Thinking for a moment, Zabuza nodded his head. Very well. Now there is just one more thing I would like to ask you. Why the hell do you have your faces painted like clowns? And why, in the name of Kami, are you four wearing tutus? The 6 ninja looked at each other, then at Naruto, then back to the Hokage. Taking the initiative, Kakashi stepped forward. The night we were supposed to leave, there was a small celebration, during which sake was provided. Long story short, Naruto got piss-ass drunk. The room was completely silent. Then all at once, they all started laughing, Naruto joining them. Even the normally stoic Hyuga Hiyashi was banging his fist on the table in laughter, much to the shock of his daughter. It took them 10 minutes to finally calm down and stopped laughing. Standing back up, Sarutobi turned back to the 7 ninja in front of him, still giggling. I see. Well, that will be all, you can go. Nodding their heads, they quickly left, hearing the people in the room burst into laughter yet again. That's it for this part. If you enjoyed it, then like, share and subscribe for the next video, as it's going to be more interesting, and also check out my other playlists. Hope you would like them too.